Hey, what up, everybody? I hope all y'all is having a blessed and humble morning. Continue to have a blessed and humble day. Yo, today, today we're gonna be diving down some rabbit holes. All right, we're gonna be having some fun, learning some history. All right, we're gonna pick up where we left off the last time. So I'm gonna give it some time, let some people, come in. And like I said, man, I hope all of y'all is having a blessed and humble day. Continue to have a blessed and humble morning. I'm not sure where y'all watching from. All right, but welcome to Philly, baby. Yeah, we all got dreams, but we stuck in the grind. Looking back at the past, but it's time to unwind. Everyone can do it, just gotta take that step. Stop dwelling on the losses, let's rewrite the rep. Hating on the president, calling him corrupt. But let me break it down, we gotta interrupt. Lost been in place, he's just playing the game. Ain't about the man, it's about change. Break the chains of the past, let's rearrange. Y'all really stuck. Puppets with strings attached, waiting for mommy and daddy to tell them they give a fuck. Strong until you know. So how do we move forward? Let's add something new. Together we can rise. Yeah, that's what we do. Don't get stuck in the past. Yeah, we living in a world where the rules don't apply. They say we gotta follow, but we ready to fly. System got us boxed in, trying to keep us small. But we rise like the phoenix. We ain't scared to brawl. All right, I have to pause this. Am I still live? Because for some reason I'm looking at my phone and it's saying, okay, I don't know what the fuck just happened. It's saying that my live stream ended. There's some weird shit going on. Feeding us lies, but we see through the smoke. We're the voice of the people, we're ready to provoke. They want us to divide, but we're stronger as one. Breaking chains, taking names, yeah, we getting it done. It's us versus the system, we're breaking the mold. Fist in the air, yeah, we taking control. No more silence, no more fear. Together we rise, let them know we're here. Riders ignite. In the world of division, they showed us how to share. But the weight of our sorrows, they never taught us to bear. We split our joys and laughter, but the pain remained untold. A burden we carry alone, a story left untold. They taught us to split everything, but not the heavy pain. He lingers in the shadows, a darkness we can't explain. We're left with shattered pieces, trying to mend what's lost. They taught us how to split everything, but not the heavy cost. We learned to divide our dreams and multiply our fears. But the ache in our hearts only grew with passing years. They gave us all the answers, except how to heal. The scars that run so deep means the time can't see it. Yeah, they taught us how to share, but only the good. Smiles and laughter like we understood. But deep down inside, there's a storm we hide. Pain in our hearts, we're just trying to ride. Put on a mask, yeah, we play the part, but nobody sees the cracks in the hearts. We share our dreams, the highs and the lows, but when it comes to hurt, we just close the doors. We share the fun times, deflect the pain, laughing in the sunshine, dancing in the rain. But the shadows linger, they creep and they crawl, breaking us down, but we don't share at all. We got hate in our hearts, but we can conceal. Taught to share the joy, but wounds, they stay unhealed. They said love was easy to divide, but the heartache never subsides. We tried to split everything into two, but the pain lingers strong and true. Shared our dreams, divided our fears, but the sorrow remained through the years. No matter how we tried to let go, the weight of our suffering continued to grow. Now we're apart, trying to heal, but some wounds are too deep to conceal. They said splitting up will set us free, yet the pain lingers in you and me. In a world where rules are set in stone, the system's grip tightens, we're not alone. Bound by chains of injustice greed. Against the odds, we fight to be free. Mighty forces try to keep us down, but our spirits rise, refusing to drown. Defying norms, breaking through the mold. In this battle of wills, our story is told. As the clash continues day by day, we stand united, come what may. For in this world where rules don't apply, our strength and unity will never die. They try to silence our dreams, but we're loud and clear. With every step forward, conquering fear. They can't hold us back. We're the fire and the flame in this battle for freedom. We're all in the game. They say it's just a game, but we're playing for keeps. With the strength of the many, we're shattered elites. No more puppets on strings, we're cutting the ties. With our eyes on the prize, we're reaching for the skies. So let's stand together, let's break down the walls. In this fight for our future, we'll answer the calls. From the ashes, we'll rise like a storm. Riders ignite, it's us versus the system, and we're ready to fight. They building walls, but we're digging tunnels. With every step we take, we're shaking the bundles. From the streets to the courts, we're raising our voice. In a world full of noise, we're making the choice. They want to keep us blind, but we see the light. Knowledge is power, and we're ready to fight. From the corners of the city to the halls of the state, where the heartbeat of the struggle can't afford to wait. It's us versus the system, we're breaking the mold. It's in the air, yeah, we're taking control. No more silence, no more fear. Together we rise, let them know we're here. Riders ignite. They taught us to split everything, but not the heavy pain. It lingers in the shadows, a darkness we can't explain. We're left with shattered pieces, trying to mend what's lost. They taught us how to split everything, but not the heavy falls. Now we stand here broken, searching for some light, hoping for a way out of this never-ending night. But through it all, we find strength in each other's embrace. Together we'll face tomorrow and find solace in this space. They say don't bring the drama, keep it all light. But every night I'm fighting these demons in sight. Whispers in my mind, yeah, they echo when they shout. While I'm smiling on the surface, I'm breaking without. We're sharing the laughter, but what's underneath? A battlefield of sorrow, a war with no peace. We're warriors in silence, but nobody knows how the pain that we carry just grows and it grows. In a world of lessons learned, they taught us how to stand and burn. But the scars we hide deep inside are the ones that never subside. We followed all rules they made, but the emptiness never fades. Their wounds like knives, cutting through leaving wounds that always grew. They painted pictures of success, but couldn't fix what's left on us. Now we're left to bear the strain of the pain that lingers, never wanes. It's us versus the system, we're breaking the mold. Listen to air, yeah, we're taking control. No more silence, no more fear. Together we rise, let them know we're here. Riders ignite. To remember this moment, remember this face, remember this sound. We're the voice of the future, and we won't back down. In the face of oppression, we'll stand up tall. It's us versus the system.
Then I pause you. What in the world just playing? I ain't paused it. Listen. All right. Like I said earlier, man, I hope all of y'all is having a blessed and humble morning. Continue to have a blessed and humble day, man. Today we're gonna dive down some rabbit holes. All right. We're gonna learn some history, have some fun. All right. Listen, if y'all know a little more than what's being you know, how can I say, watch today, y'all more than welcome to, say what y'all got to say in the comment, give a Shorty y'all opinions, y'all perspective, all right, what y'all already know, man. If y'all think something is cap, man, call it out. Blessings to the word, man. Big shout out to the word. Make sure y'all go check out the word, all right. Great conversations, great topics. We got young Riaz in the building, man. Make sure y'all go check out my young bull, all right, in his little shorts. And we got Candyman, baby. Blessings, King. How you doing? Big shout out to Candyman. If y'all into roasting, comedy, and humor, man, and great conversations, make sure y'all go check out Candyman. All right. And with that being said, man, let's get this conversation started. All right. Listen. All right. Like, we're gonna pick up where we left off the last time. All right. We were speaking about the rise and fall, right, of cocaine. Blessings, we got Looney Tunes in the building, yo. Big shout out to Looney Tunes, yo. Make sure y'all go check out Looney Tunes too, man. Great conversations and great topics, yo. Listen, you can always catch him in Mouthpiece, man. Big shout out to Mouthpiece. I know he's not here right now, man, but you got to give him his roses. Salute to Mouthpiece, yo. That's my big bro right there. All right, YouTube's David Bain. But anyways, look, listen. We're gonna be diving down some rabbit holes. All right, I want to hit at least two. Pick up where we left off the last time on the rise and fall of the cocaine, allegedly, right? It's not really the rise and fall of cocaine. All right, so let me read the title correctly for you. All right, the rise and fall of cocaine from Coca-Cola ingredients, all right, to cartel nightmares. All right, so we went down that little rabbit hole. We paused at the 13-minute 36 seconds, all right, of the video. So we're gonna pick up from there. All right. We've learned a lot, all right, diving down these rabbit holes, all right. And I know I mix it up a little bit, all right, because I don't want to stay stuck on one, all right, on one part of history. Because it's crazy, they're all connected. You just gotta keep listening one way or another. Like, listen, you don't understand. It's like when I tell people, right, a lot of shit lead back to the Vatican. People are like, oh, that's bullshit. No, go do your research. A lot of shit goes back to the Vatican. And I'm not going to sit here and lie, right? The statistics might be a little different, but in my opinion, all right, I feel as though that 99.99% of shit lead back to the motherfucking Vatican, all right? From what I've been learning, all right? I don't know what y'all opinion is or how y'all feel about that, all right? But that's what I think, all right? But we is definitely about to dive down that rabbit hole, and then we're gonna dive down, the rabbit hole from the first election. Has history changed or has it just been covered up? All right. Give me 1 second while I set this video up because I still got the music in the background. All right. So my voice is fucked up. All right. We got the video up. All right. But y'all know what's crazy? Listen, they told us we were less. They told us to shrink, right? To fold ourselves into, boxes too small, for our spirit, too tight for our truth. They sold us lies dressed up as, limits, right? And expected us to wear them like chains. But let me be clear, all right? We're not what they said we were. We are not the scraps they tried to feed us. We are not the shadows they tried to keep us in. We are the fire that burns through the bullshit. We are the proof that survival ain't just survival, all right? It's transformation. Every scar, every bruise, every time they tried to silence us, we turned it into rhythm, into voice, into movement. They said we were broken, but we became, how can I say, architects, all right, of our own healing. They said we were weak, but we became warriors with laughter, sharp enough to cut through hypocrisy. All right. I'm cutting right through the lies tonight. I'm dragging the false narratives into the light because the truth is we are better than what we were told we were. We are bigger than their labels, stronger than their projections, louder than their silence. All right. We are the generation that refuses to bow, refuses to swallow shame, refuses to carry burdens that were never ours to begin with. So hear me, all right? Don't let them trick you into believing you're less. Don't let them convince you, all right, that your story ain't worth telling. Don't let them cage your power. We are the living contradiction to their scripts. We are the punchline to their weak ass joke. And we are the reminder that legacy is not given, all right? It's built brick by brick, word by word, and truth by truth. Tonight, I'm not here to be polite. I'm here to be real. I'm here to be raw. I'm here to remind you that we are better, all right? Bolder, louder, freer than the lies, all right, that they fed us. And that makes them uncomfortable, all right? Good. Let them choke on the truth, on some real shit, all right? They told us to, settle, to take the crumbs and call it feast, to swallow silence and call it peace. All right. But let's be real, those crumbs were never enough. And that silence was never ours. We were raised on lies that said that this is all you'll ever be. And too many of us believed it. But tonight I'm here, how can I say, to cut through the truth until, the lie, it burns. Because we are not the leftovers of someone else's dreams. We are not the shadows of somebody else's spotlight. We are the architects of our own legacy, the builders of our own stage, all right? The writers of our own script. Every time they tried to box us in, we broke the box. Every time they tried to chain us down, we turned those chains into rhythm, into movement, and into power, all right? So With that being said, all right, we're gonna get this drawing started. All right, I want to talk about. Listen, let's talk about it. Let's drag it into the light. All right, the rise and fall of cocaine ain't just about a drug. All right, it's about power, control, and the lies they fed us for 8,000 years. All right, indigenous peoples, all right, in the Andes used to, use cocoa as sacred medicine, a leaf tied to spirit, ceremony, survival. Then Europeans came along, snatched it up, all right, stripped it, off its meaning, and turned it into a commodity. All right. Sigmund Freud called it magical cocoa. All right. Magical, and turned it into, Coca-Cola, poured it into their drinks, and pharmaceuticals, pharmacies sold it like candy. But but within decades, the same system that glorified it flipped the script. Suddenly, cocaine was the devil. Not because the science changed, but because racism, politics, and fear, all right, demanded a new villain. They demonetized, all right, they demonetized it, all right, not to protect people, but to control them. They built empires off of it. Pablo Escobar stacking 30 billion while government spent 1 trillion on a war on drugs that failed. Failed so bad that production today is higher than ever. All right. And here's the truth. Times haven't changed. The faces at the gates just swapped out. All right. Different gatekeepers. Same thing. They still profit off of pain. They still weaponize fear. They still decide who gets, punished and who gets paid. They still tell us we're broken while they cash checks off the cracks. All right. This is supposed to be the untold story, right? Cocaine didn't fall. It was, pushed. It was pushed into the, shadow so they could keep the spotlight. It was pushed onto communities they wanted to control. It was pushed into prisons while corporations kept their hands clean. And we're supposed to believe that's justice? Nah, man. All right. Let's be real. That's hypocrisy dressed up as a policy. So tonight, I'm not here to whisper history. All right. I'm here to roast it, to remind you that we're better than the lies they told us. We are smarter, all right, than the fear that they sold us. We are stronger than the chains they tried to wrap around us. And if they don't like hearing that, let them choke on the truth. Because truth is, all right, the war on drugs wasn't about drugs. It was about people, all right, about us, about keeping us keeping us in cages while they kept the keys. And I refuse to let the story be told without fire. All right. So fuck it. Let's pick up on the video where we left off. All right. And let's listen to what they got to say. If y'all got something to say, let us Shorty know what y'all think and how y'all feel. Oh, wait. I'm not on the right channel, am I? And let's do this. 1336. 1738.
Of other people who followed his recommendations. Because while
Hold on. So that people can get a better understanding, we're going to pick up right here, 1336. I went a little bit back. Right, boom. So
in 1884, a young, ambitious neurologist in Vienna was desperate to make a name for himself. Sigmund Freud was 28 years old, deeply in debt, and eager to marry his fiancée, Martha Bernays. But he couldn't afford to get married until he established his reputation and earned more money. He needed a breakthrough, some discovery that would make the medical world take notice. Then he read about cocaine. Freud got his hands on some of the pure cocaine hydrochloride that pharmaceutical companies were now producing. And like Mantegazza before him, he tried it himself. The effect was immediate and powerful. He felt energized. His depression, which he'd struggled with for years, lifted. His productivity soared. He stayed up late into the night, writing, thinking clearly, feeling like the best version of himself. He was convinced he'd found something revolutionary. In July 1884, Freud published a paper called Über Coca, about coca. Reading it now is fascinating because you can feel his genuine enthusiasm and optimism radiating from every page. He reviewed all the existing literature on coca and cocaine. He described his own experiments, and he made bold claims. Cocaine could treat depression, digestive disorders, morphine addiction, alcoholism, asthma, and even sexual impotence.
Yeah, that is crazy, right? Back in the day. So their drugs didn't work, the opioids and all that shit, right? I mean, the meth and all that shit, right? I said opioids. They stole opioids too. That's the funny part. I'm not going to sit here and lie. Like, they, listen. These mofos went around stealing shit from tribes, right? And what's crazy, right? There was a point in time where they allegedly lynched, right, motherfuckers because they thought they had magic. But yet, what do you call these scientists and doctors that deal with the stolen magic, right? That they call medicine today? And what's crazy is, right, they couldn't get, the high that they got off the drugs they made wasn't good. And it's crazy how today, right, how back in the days, right, these tribes used to heal people with this, with the coca leaf, right? But scientists, right, when they took over, until today, it hasn't changed since they've taken over, right? Since they stole, let me put it like that. It's not taking over. Let me rephrase what I'm saying. Since they've stole, all right, these tribes, magical medicine, all right, they have turned it into something that turn people into zombies. Instead of healing, it's killing.
He called it a magical drug and a divine plant. Freud was so confident that he started giving cocaine to his friends, his colleagues, and his family members. He sent cocaine to Martha in the mail as a gift. He took it regularly himself, and then he gave it to his close friend, Ernst von Fleischl-Marxow. Fleischl was a brilliant scientist, but he was suffering. Years earlier, he'd contracted a terrible infection during an autopsy and had to have his thumb amputated. The phantom pain was excruciating, and he'd become addicted to morphine trying to manage it. Freud thought cocaine could cure Fleischl's morphine addiction. After all, that was one of the miracle uses everyone was talking about.
This mofo was out here trying to, like I said yesterday, all right, they're replacing, all right, one addiction with another drug. It's like, I say the same thing when people go to rehab, right, and they do this detox thing. I always say the same thing. I was like, it's crazy and it's wild how y'all say y'all healing these patients, but y'all sitting here, right, trying to get them off this addiction by giving them another drug that is addictive too. Man, let's make it make sense.
So he gave his friend cocaine in increasingly large doses to help him quit morphine. At first, it seemed to work. Fleischl was able to reduce his morphine use. His mood improved. He seemed to be getting better. But within a few months, something horrible was happening. Fleischl wasn't just using the cocaine Freud gave him. He was buying more, a lot more. He was consuming enormous amounts, a full gram of cocaine per day, which is a massive dose by any standard. He started experiencing paranoid delusions. He would hallucinate, seeing insects crawling on his skin. He would stay awake for days at a time. His physical health deteriorated rapidly. Freud was horrified. He watched his friend descend into what we would now recognize as severe cocaine addiction and psychosis.
So tell me, how is this healing? How is having someone, put in a worse predicament than they was before healing? And it's crazy because I think the part that they think that was so magical was how cocaine made you feel so high, so elevated on some real shit. Made you feel like you was on cloud 9 or something like that, I guess. I can't tell you the feeling of cocaine because I've never had cocaine. But according to everybody that uses it, they all up in cloud 9.
Fleischl would suffer for years before finally dying in 1891, his body and mind destroyed. This experience shook Freud deeply. He quietly backed away from his earlier enthusiasm about cocaine. He stopped prescribing it. He stopped taking it himself. And he definitely stopped talking about it publicly. In later years, Freud's biographers would call his cocaine episode the only serious error of his scientific career. But
he called it an error. Why? Because after you stole something from somebody else that stole it from somebody else, right? You didn't know how to handle it, how to use it properly. You just know that it did all these wonderful things, and y'all just, sat here and enslaved the people that used it, made them addicts. Not all of them, all right? But made them addicts, right? And did the same thing to the world just for what? To please your ego? And everybody watching like this is a goddamn novella or a movie.
the damage was done, not to Freud's reputation, which would recover and flourish, but to his friend, and to the thousands of other people who followed his recommendations. Because while Freud was quietly retreating from cocaine, his paper, Über Coca, was still circulating. Other doctors were still reading it. Pharmaceutical companies were still marketing cocaine as safe and non-addictive. And something else happened in 1884 that would cement cocaine's place in medical history. One of Freud's colleagues, an ophthalmologist named Carl Koller, realized something crucial. Cocaine's numbing effect could revolutionize surgery. Before cocaine, eye surgery was a nightmare. Patients had to be fully conscious because general anesthesia was too risky for delicate eye operations. Imagine someone cutting into your eye while you're awake, holding still through sheer willpower and terror.
That's your wow.
Kohler discovered that a few drops of cocaine solution could completely numb the eye, allowing for painless surgery while the patient remained conscious.
Oh, that's wild. They was putting cocaine in people's eyeballs to do surgery? The shit ain't changed from ancient history time to now, yo. I'm telling you. And this wasn't ancient history. I'm just saying. All right. From Egyptian times to, listen. All right. They just, straight up twisted the story when we was young. Those that paid attention and asked questions, all right, knew better. Those that didn't pay attention and didn't ask questions didn't know better until they did their own research.
This was a genuine breakthrough. Within months, surgeons around the world were using cocaine as a local anesthetic.
Wow.
It's still used today in certain nasal and throat surgeries, though we have safer alternatives now for most procedures. So here's where we are by 1885.
Hold up. Wait. So today in hospitals, they use cocaine? In certain surgeries? Can you tell me what surgeries is required for them to use something that has cocaine in it? I did not know that. Oh, but wait, cocaine numbs. Could that be put in the anesthesia? Hold up, wait a minute. While this plays, I'm about to search up what's in anesthesia.
5. Cocaine has split into two paths. Path 1, legitimate medical use, or particularly as an anesthetic. This is cocaine as a genuine tool that helped people. Path 2, unregulated, recreational and medicinal wines to patent medicines sold with wild claims and consumed by people who had no idea they were developing addictions. And right in the middle of these two paths, in a small pharmacy in Atlanta, Georgia, a wounded veteran was about to create something that would outlive everyone else in this story. Let's go back to that photograph from 1885. John
That's the bull that the bull got high. That's wild. But I was just searching up what's in anesthesia, and it's not really telling me. It just tells you that it's, a numbing medication that they use. And he said that they still use it in certain surgeries. All right, it's just, they use it now in a safer way. So I'm guessing that they figured out, all right, and they mastered how the tribes, right, used to use it back then. But y'all went through all this. Y'all killed millions in the process, I guess. until y'all figured out how to use it a safe way. That's crazy.
Sits in his pharmacy, looking exhausted. He's 54 years old, but the Civil War aged him beyond his years. In 1865, he took a sabre wound to the chest during one of the last cavalry battles of the war. The injury never properly healed, leaving him with chronic pain that would plague him for the rest of his life. Like thousands of other Civil War veterans, Pemberton turned to morphine for relief. And like thousands of other veterans, he became addicted. By the 1880s, morphine addiction among former soldiers was so common that people called it the soldier's disease. Pemberton was desperate to break free from it, and he'd read about cocaine being promoted as a cure for morphine addiction. He started experimenting in his pharmacy, trying to create his own cocaine-based medicine that might help him and that he could sell to others suffering from the same problem. Pemberton had heard about the success of Vin Mariani in Europe, and he decided to make his own version. In 1885, he created Pemberton's French wine coca, a mixture of wine, coca extract, cola nut, which contains caffeine, and damiana, a plant used as an aphrodisiac. He marketed it as a cure for nerve trouble, dyspepsia, mental and physical exhaustion, and morphine addiction.
Yo, it's wild how back in the day they put cocaine in the toothpaste. All right, they was getting these kids high as shit, all right, with the toothpaste. They had cocaine in Coca-Cola. They had cocaine in wine. They had cocaine in beer. Like, what was y'all adding cocaine to the food too? Listen, was everybody on cloud nine back in the, I gotta ask the question. If nobody's gonna feel comfortable enough to ask the question, I'm gonna ask the question. Like, was everybody a guinea pig? Like, did they use everybody as a test subject? Well, guess what? Times ain't changed. We guinea pigs today too. What do y'all think is in our food?
Advertisements claimed it was endorsed by doctors and scholars. Some of the marketing was pretty wild. One ad called it a most wonderful invigorator of the sexual organs.
Yeah.
For about a year, Pemberton's French wine coca sold well. He wasn't getting rich, but it was a respectable business. Then in November 1885...
I rewind it back a few seconds. But listen, basically they put cocaine in the wine so that people's how can I say sex life could enhance. Yo, listen, man. I know we still got freaks now, but it seemed like people back in the days were freaks. Like, damn, they thought about sex a lot. What in the world?
But it was a respectable business. Then in November 1885, Atlanta and Fulton County passed prohibition legislation. Starting in 1886, alcohol would be banned. Pemberton had a problem. His entire product was based on wine. He needed to reformulate it, remove the...
Hold up, wait a minute. So there was a point in time where they was trying to ban alcohol, like they banned marijuana and they banned all these drugs. Oh shit. I would have never thought about that. I would have never even imagined that they tried to even freaking ban alcohol.
His entire product was based on wine. He needed to reformulate it, remove the alcohol, but keep the cocaine and caffeine that people loved. So he went back to his lab and started experimenting. He kept the coca extract, cocaine, and the cola nut, caffeine. He added sugar, a lot of it, to make it palatable without the wine. He added some botanical oils to give it flavor: vanilla, orange, lemon, nutmeg, cinnamon. And he mixed it with carbonated water because carbonated soft drinks were becoming popular. On May 8, 1886, Pemberton's bookkeeper, Frank Robinson, suggested a name that had good alliteration: Coca-Cola. Robinson even designed the distinctive cursive logo that, with minor modifications, is still used today. Pemberton started selling the syrup to pharmacies. They would mix it with carbonated water and sell it by the glass for 5 cents. It was marketed as a brain tonic and a cure for headaches and exhaustion.
I'm dead. So around this period of time, you got alcohol, Coke, and coffee for nothing more than 5 cents. Ain't that some shit? What the hell? Yo, hold up, wait a minute. And all this shit was legal. So what made them change their minds and ban it? They loved it so much.
Now, the crucial question everyone wants to know: how much cocaine was actually in Coca-Cola? This is where it gets complicated because the formula changed over time and Pemberton was never entirely consistent. But the best estimates, based on later analysis and historical records, suggest that each glass of Coca-Cola in 1886 contained approximately 8 to 9 milligrams of cocaine. That might not sound like much, but for context, a typical line of cocaine snorted today might be 50-100 milligrams. So a glass of Coca-Cola had about 1/10 of that. Not enough to get you dramatically high, but definitely enough to give you a noticeable stimulant effect, especially combined with the caffeine from the cola nut.
I'm dead. Like, wait a minute. So these motherfuckers figured out how much to put in there to not have people hallucinating and doing dumb shit. Yo. Look, what's crazy is times ain't changed. Listen, I don't know if y'all remember when they first came out with the Four Locos. All right. I think this was, I can't, listen, it was around 2015, if I'm not mistaken, 2016. I know I was pregnant with my firstborn. All right. And people was hype about these damn Four Locos, right? And then, bodies started to end up in the hospital. People started having seizures and stuff like that. Then it turned out that the motherfucking drink had coke in it. Literally, one of the ingredients in that John was coke and a whole bunch of other bullshit in it. All right. Then they had to recall back the Four Loko, all right, and take out all that shit and bring it back out to the shelves. All right. They still do this shit on the low. Back then, they did it in our how can I say, our ancestors' face? I'm gonna say it like that. All right. Now, all right, they do it on the low, so we don't even know about it. So there'll be no arguments, no fuss, no bullshit, man. All right. I just wonder if back then the people knew that they were guinea pigs, or they just ignored the fact. Because I could honestly sit here and say that I know that in this era and point in time, I know that a lot of people is guinea pigs. We is guinea pigs. They experiment with us every day, with our food, with the medication, with everything.
People who drank it said it made them feel awake, alert, and energetic. Given that it literally contained cocaine and caffeine, this makes perfect sense. Pemberton wouldn't live to see his creation become famous. His health continued to deteriorate. His morphine addiction worsened. He needed money desperately, and in 1888, he began selling off pieces of his Coca-Cola business to various investors, including a businessman named Asa Candler. Pemberton died on August 16th, 1888, poor and still addicted to morphine. He never knew that his formula would become one of the most valuable trade secrets in business history. Asa Candler, on the other hand, understood the potential.
Let me pause it right here, because it's crazy how, right, cocaine was supposed to heal all that, right? And it was supposed to help you, right, recover from the morphine addiction. But how he still died from morphine? That's a whole contradiction right there. So in reality, right, listen, if y'all been watching from the beginning, all right, if y'all missed part 1, all right, it's on a Shorty Speaks, off my chest, right, into the mic, a Shorty Speaks her mind, all right, 2 days ago or 3 days ago, something like that, all right. We got the first part there. Listen, but watching this, all right, reading, doing my research, listen, there's so many contradictions. Everything was really about control, all right, everything. They've seen what this drug could do. Not just this drug, plenty of other drugs. All right. And they threw it out there, experimented on everybody without nobody even knowing it. Because what's crazy is nobody even knew about this. Everybody was asleep until not so long ago. All right. A lot of people started waking up not so long ago and seeing right through the smoke. So shout out to those that are reclaiming their voice, all right, and are still talking, still, bringing awareness to situations like this, all right, still diving down rabbit holes and doing lives like this, like what, Shorty is doing, all right, and speaking on this and not dwelling on it. because we can't dwell on this, all right? What we could do is see what we can borrow from it.
He meticulously bought up the rights to Coca-Cola from Pemberton and several other investors who had acquired pieces of the business. By 1891, Candler had consolidated complete control of the Coca-Cola formula for a total of about 2,300 tons, roughly $75,000 in today's money. Candler was a shrewd businessman, and he started aggressively marketing Coca-Cola.
Damn.
He gave away coupons for free glasses. He put the Coca-Cola logo on calendars, clocks, posters, bookmarks, anything to spread brand awareness. The drink became phenomenally popular. But by the early 1900s, Candler had a problem brewing. Public opinion about cocaine was starting to shift. What had been seen as medicine was increasingly being seen as a dangerous drug. Newspapers were running alarming stories about cocaine fiends and addiction. Candler needed to protect his brand. Between 1903 and 1929, the Coca-Cola Company gradually reduced and then eliminated the cocaine content in their drink.
Which is true. And if you've been watching, right, for a minute, y'all know we did a live, right, about the Coca-Cola, how it started, right, how it had Coke in the beginning, why they had to remove it. All right. So if y'all are new to this, make sure y'all go check the older lives, all right, so that y'all can catch up. Because listen, these stories just get deeper and deeper. And what's crazy is we think that this shit happened, how can I say, thousands and thousands of years ago, and this happened, man, within the past, how can I say, hundreds of years. It hasn't been thousands and millions of years, all right. But hey, we'll talk about that later on.
The exact timeline is murky because the company was understandably secretive about it, but by 1929, Coca-Cola was definitely cocaine-free. Interestingly, they still use coca leaf extract today, but it goes through a process where the cocaine is completely removed. The company contracts with a pharmaceutical company in New Jersey that's legally allowed to import coca leaves, extract the cocaine for medical use, and then send the decocainized leaf extract to Coca-Cola for flavoring. So technically, Coca-Cola still has coca in it, just not the cocaine part. But why did public opinion shift so dramatically? Why did cocaine go from miracle medicine to dangerous drug? To understand that, we need to talk about the darker side of cocaine that was becoming impossible to ignore by 1900. And we need to talk about how racism and fear were used to turn a medical debate into a moral panic.
That's crazy, right? They used our people to, get, and you know what's crazy, right? Somewhere along this timeline, all right, we're going to have fun doing these videos, all right? Tomorrow, we're going to do another live, all right? And we're going to talk about the people that control the money, all right? Like, listen, everything ties in. Little by little, y'all be connecting the dots, all right? Like, we got so many videos we're going to review and react to, all right? And I would love to hear y'all opinions, what y'all think about it. And I got to pause it. So if y'all want to make sure y'all go check him out, all right? After Hours History. The rise and fall of cocaine from Coca-Cola ingredients to cartel nightmare, history to sleep, all right? Like, go watch these videos, all right? He's not the only one. There's so many channels out here, all right, with history videos, all right? And we've reviewed and reacted to so many of them, all right? Gave our opinions, our thoughts, all right? Like, we've called cap to the shit that we thought was cap, all right? But listen, they all, one way or another, tie in, all right, and connect the dots.
By 1900, doctors were starting to see something they hadn't anticipated. Patients who had been prescribed cocaine or who had bought it over the counter in the many tonics and medicines available were coming back to their doctors with disturbing symptoms. They couldn't stop using it. When they tried to quit, they experienced severe depression, fatigue, and intense cravings. Some reported
all the symptoms it was supposed to cure.
Paranoid delusions. Others became violent and erratic. This is where we need to talk about what cocaine actually does to your brain, because understanding this helps explain why the pendulum swung so hard from miracle medicine to dangerous drug. Cocaine works by flooding your brain with dopamine, a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and reward. Normally, when you do something your brain likes, eat good food, have sex, accomplish something difficult, you get a little surge of dopamine.
Hmm.
That's your brain's way of saying, that was good, do that again.
Hey,
Cocaine bypasses this natural system. It doesn't just create dopamine, it also blocks your brain from reabsorbing it. So dopamine builds up in your system, creating an intense feeling of euphoria, confidence, and energy. But here's the problem. Your brain adapts. When you flood your system with dopamine repeatedly, your brain starts producing less of it naturally. It also creates fewer dopamine receptors, thinking, well, we're getting way too much of this signal. Let's turn down the volume. So now you need cocaine just to feel normal. Without it, you're left with less dopamine than you had before you started using. That's the crash, that deep depression and exhaustion that makes people desperately want more cocaine.
And I'm good. Why would I want to put something in my system that would make me feel like that when I don't have it? That's why I don't take medicine. I don't take perks, none of that shit, yo. I deal with the pain, man. Listen, I can have the word, I don't care. Just leave me alone and I won't take my pain on you.
And unlike chewing coca leaves, which release cocaine slowly and in small amounts over hours, snorting or injecting pure cocaine creates an immediate, intense spike. The faster and more intense the high, the more addictive the drug. By 1900, enough people had fallen into this cycle that the medical community couldn't ignore it anymore. The medical journals started publishing case studies. A 1902 article in the Journal of the American Medical Association described patients who were consuming enormous amounts of cocaine, some up to 5 grams per day,
Dang.
and experiencing what we would now recognize as cocaine psychosis, paranoia, hallucinations, violent behavior. One doctor described a patient who was convinced that insects were crawling under his skin and had scratched his arms, bloody trying to dig them out.
Damn, that is wild. But I have a question. All right. They say that they extract the cocaine from the cocoa leaf, right? When they make the Coca-Cola. But why is Coca-Cola so addictive? Does it still have like certain traces of cocaine on it or something? Because people are not just Coca-Cola, all right, Pepsi, all these sodas that are made by Coca-Cola and Pepsi Cola, all right. All these sodas turn out to be addictive. It's like once people start drinking sodas, it's like cocaine or heroin. Same shit as coffee though. Ain't that some shit? No, I noticed that people that drink coffee too can't be without coffee.
This condition, called cocaine bugs or formication, became one of the telltale signs of severe cocaine addiction. Another documented case involved a woman who had started using cocaine for a minor ailment and within months was stealing from her family, lying compulsively and staying awake for days at a time in a state of agitated paranoia. These stories started appearing in newspapers. The press loved them because they were sensational. Cocaine fiends, screamed the headlines. The drug that destroys lives. Now, to be clear, cocaine addiction is real and serious. The doctors and families dealing with severe addiction cases had legitimate concerns. But what happened next wasn't just about medicine or public health. What happened next was about fear, prejudice, and control. And it would shape drug policy in America for the next century in ways that had nothing to do with science and everything to do with racism. In 1910, a man named Dr. Hamilton Wright testified before Congress. Wright was the Opium Commissioner of the United States, essentially the government's point person on drug policy. And he was on a mission to pass federal legislation controlling cocaine and opium. His testimony before Congress included statements that would sound shocking today if they weren't so sadly familiar.
Why would they need an opium commissioner? You see where I'm coming from? Like, I understand, a mayor, a governor, I understand a commissioner for the police department, a fire department, and all that, but an opium commissioner?
He claimed that cocaine was causing most of the attacks upon white women of the South. He said that cocaine made black men more dangerous, more
What?
violent, more immune to pain. He told Congress that Southern sheriffs had started carrying larger caliber guns because cocaine supposedly gave black men superhuman strength
What?
and made them.
Hold up, wait a minute. This mofo really said that? So what was the difference between you, a white man, and a black man? Hold up, wait a minute. Yo, hold up. So when you took the cocaine, what did it do? It made you weak? Yo, wait, did they even pay it? Like, I don't think they was listening. Like, anybody ever question his logic? Let's listen to it again.
Day, if they weren't so sadly familiar. He claimed that cocaine was causing most of the attacks upon white women of the South. He said that cocaine made black men more dangerous, more violent, more immune to pain. He told Congress that Southern sheriffs had started carrying larger caliber guns because cocaine supposedly gave black men superhuman strength and made them harder to kill. None of this was based on actual evidence.
That's some bullshit. That's crazy. Yo, between these mofos and Plecker, boy.
It was propaganda, pure and simple. But it was effective propaganda because it tapped into the deep racial fears of white America in the early 1900s, particularly in the South, where the post-Reconstruction backlash was in full swing. Newspapers ran with these stories. The New York Times published articles with titles like "Negro Cocaine Fiends Are a New Southern Menace." These articles described fictional scenarios of black men using cocaine and then attacking white people. The racist narrative was clear. Cocaine was making black people forget their place in the social hierarchy. It was making them aggressive and uppity. It needed to be controlled. Here's the reality that these newspapers didn't report. Studies from that era, when you actually look at the data, showed that cocaine use was actually higher among white populations.
But yet the black community was the most dangerous one under cocaine influence. Get the fuck out my face, y'all. My bad if I'm cussing. But shit.
Particularly middle-class white people who could afford it from pharmacies. The wealthy were more likely to use cocaine than the poor. White people were more likely to use it than black people. But facts didn't matter. The narrative was too useful. This same tactic had been used before with opium and Chinese immigrants.
Yep, and we went down that rabbit hole. All right. How the scientists went, all right, and I think it was in the beginning of this video. No, if I'm not mistaken, no, I think it was another video that we watched. If not, it's the beginning of this video. All right. And how they destroyed all of China with opioids and all that stuff. All right. And it's crazy how it's these scientists, these doctors, these politicians, like they all come together, yo.
In the 1800s, when white Americans wanted to restrict Chinese immigration and labor, they spread stories about opium dens corrupting white women. The Chinese, they claimed, were using opium to destroy American society from within. Now, the same playbook was being used with cocaine and black Americans. Southern states were the first to pass laws restricting cocaine. Not coincidentally, these were the same states implementing Jim Crow laws and finding any excuse to incarcerate black men, who could then be used as convict labor.
That's why
Tennessee banned cocaine in 1897. Other southern states followed. By 1914, 46 states had some form of cocaine regulation, but the push was for federal legislation. Hamilton Wright and others wanted a national law that would control cocaine and opiates across all states. On December 17, 1914, Congress passed the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. On the surface, the Harrison Act wasn't a complete ban. It was structured as a tax law that required anyone who manufactured, imported, or distributed cocaine or opiates
So instead of getting rid of it, y'all taxed it, right? And started profiting off of it. Control.
to register with the federal government and pay taxes. But the way it was written and enforced effectively criminalized non-medical use. Doctors could still prescribe these drugs,
What?
but only for legitimate medical purposes. And importantly, addiction itself was not considered a legitimate medical purpose. This meant that if you were addicted to cocaine or morphine, doctors were no longer allowed to prescribe it to help you manage your addiction. You were a criminal, not a patient. The enforcement of the Harrison Act was selectively brutal. Poor people, particularly poor Black and immigrant communities, were targeted. Wealthy white people who could afford private doctors often continued accessing these drugs with
That's
little
wild.
interference. Over the next few decades, the penalties got harsher. Possession went from a tax violation to a criminal offence with serious prison time. By the 1920s and 1930s,
Who changed that law?
cocaine had been almost completely pushed underground. Pharmaceutical companies stopped manufacturing it, except for specific medical uses. You couldn't buy it in pharmacies anymore. The coca wines and tonics had disappeared from shelves. Remember Coca-Cola? By the 1920s,
Mm. Yo, that's wild. Yo, see, the story didn't end with Escobar. It didn't end with the so-called war on drugs. It just changed uniforms. All right, the gatekeepers today don't wear cartel chains. They wear, suits, ties, and corporate smiles. They sit in, boardrooms, not back alleys. They push pills with billion-dollar ads, all right, instead of street corners. Big Pharma floods communities with opioids, then pretends to be shocked, all right, when overdoses skyrocket. Private prisons, all right, cash in on bodies, turning human lives into profit margins. All right, politicians preach law and order while their donors bankroll on the chaos. All right, so let's call out the hypocrisy. They demonized, all right, cocaine, locked up generations, destroyed families, and called it justice. Meanwhile, they let pharmaceutical companies hand out prescriptions like candy. And when the fallout hit, they called it crisis. Notice the difference. One community gets cages, the other gets sympathy. That's not science, right? That's racism, politics, and profit. And don't get it twisted. This ain't just, history repeating. This is the same damn playbook. Just with, new players. All right? Different gatekeepers. All right? Same gates. They still decide who gets punished and who gets paid. They still weaponize fear, still profit off pain, still guard the doors to freedom like it's their, like it's their theirs to give. So I'm here to say, all right, and say it plain. Times haven't changed. The names changed, the faces changed, but the system stayed the same. And if we don't call it out, they'll keep running the same hustle, generation after generation. We are better than the lies they told us. We are stronger than the cages they built for us. And if they don't like hearing that, let them choke on the motherfucking truth. Because the truth is, the war was never on drugs. It was on people, on us, on communities they wanted to control. And I refuse to let that story, all right, be told without fire.
had disappeared from shelves. Remember Coca-Cola? By the 1920s, they'd removed all the cocaine from their formula. They had to. The political and cultural climate had shifted so dramatically that even the hint of cocaine in a product could destroy a company. For about 50 years, from the 1920s through the 1960s, cocaine almost disappeared from American society. It still existed, of course. You could find it if you looked hard enough, usually in jazz clubs and among wealthy bohemian circles. It was expensive and rare. Most people had never seen it, and never would. The government and the press had moved on to other drug panics, marijuana in the 1930s, then heroin in the 1950s. Cocaine seemed like a problem that had been solved, a relic of a more naive era when people didn't understand addiction. But in South America, in the countries where the coca plant grew naturally, something very different was happening. Coca farmers in Peru, Bolivia, and Colombia had continued growing the plant. Some of it was used traditionally by indigenous communities. Some was exported legally to pharmaceutical companies for legitimate medical use. But a few enterprising individuals were looking at the economics and asking an interesting question. What if we could produce cocaine in large quantities and smuggle it into the United States, where there was still demand despite the laws? What if we treated it not as medicine, but as a commodity, like coffee or tobacco, but illegal? What kind of money could we make? By the 1970s, they were about to find out, and the answer would be more money than anyone could have possibly imagined. 3 things happened in the 1970s that created the modern cocaine trade. First, American demand exploded. The counterculture movement of the 1960s had normalized drug experimentation among young people. By the 1970s, this had evolved into what some called the me decade, a culture of hedonism and self-indulgence, particularly among the wealthy. Cocaine fit perfectly into this cultural moment. Unlike marijuana, which made you relaxed and introspective, or LSD, which was intense and unpredictable, cocaine made you feel confident, energetic.
Ooh, he mentioned Mary Jane. Ooh, Rasta baby. Rasta baby. Shit, can't nothing compare to Mary Jane, man. All these other drugs, man, the way I see people be on them, man, I'm good. I be telling people, man, it's just wake and bake, all right? Wake and bake, all right? And he not lying about this shit, man. I've never seen nobody on marijuana behave the way they behave when they're on cocaine, all right, crack, heroin, meth, or any of that shit.
3 things happened in the 1970s that created the modern cocaine trade. First, American demand exploded. The counterculture movement of the 1960s had normalized drug experimentation among young people. By the 1970s, this had evolved into what some called the me decade, a culture of hedonism and self-indulgence, particularly among the wealthy. Cocaine fit perfectly into this cultural moment. Unlike marijuana, which made you relaxed and introspective, or LSD, which was intense and unpredictable, cocaine made you feel confident, energetic, and glamorous. It was the drug.
It made people feel confident, so they thought it was like Superman. Huh?
Cocaine made you feel confident, energetic, and glamorous. It was the drug of success. Wall Street traders used it to work longer hours. Hollywood celebrities used it at parties. Disco clubs like Studio 54 in New York were essentially built around cocaine culture. The drug lost its scary reputation from the early 1900s. A new generation had no memory of the cocaine fiends their grandparents had feared. Instead, cocaine was marketed as non-addictive, sophisticated, the champagne of drugs. Second, Colombian smugglers had infrastructure and experience. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Colombia had been a major source of marijuana smuggled into the United States. Smugglers had established routes, contacts, and systems for getting product across the Caribbean and through Mexico. But marijuana had a problem. It was bulky. You could only fit so much in a plane or boat. And the profit margins, while good, weren't spectacular. Cocaine was different. It was compact. A kilogram of cocaine was worth far more than a kilogram of marijuana, but it took up the same amount of space. The profit potential was exponentially higher. So Colombian smuggling organizations started pivoting from marijuana to cocaine. They already had the infrastructure. They just needed to scale up production. Which brings us to the third factor, agricultural boom in the Andes. In Peru and Bolivia, coca growing had been ramping up throughout the 1970s. Part of this was economic desperation. Coca farming was more profitable than traditional crops. Part of it was political instability. Weak governments meant less enforcement. Colombian traffickers realized they could buy coca paste from Peru and Bolivia, process it into cocaine in Colombia, and then smuggle it to the United States. They were positioned perfectly as the middlemen who controlled the most valuable part of the supply chain, the final processing and distribution. By 1975, cocaine was pouring into Miami. Let me give you a sense of the money involved. In the late 1970s, a kilogram of cocaine cost about $5,000 to produce in Colombia. That same kilogram could be sold wholesale in Miami for $60,000. Broken down and sold retail in smaller amounts, it could generate $300,000 or more. These weren't just good profit margins. These were revolutionary profit margins. For comparison, even the most successful, legitimate businesses rarely have profit margins above 20-30%. The cocaine trade had margins of 5,000% or more. When you have that kind of money at stake, everything changes.
But by them doing that, all right, they end up cutting the cocaine so many times, so much in different ways, right, that it ends up messing with the people's heads. All right, it burns them brain cells. The cocaine ain't even cocaine no more. Can you even call it cocaine? Right after it's been, broken down, cut up, and messed with, tampered with so much, just so that people can make their profit.
Violence becomes rational. Corruption becomes inevitable. And the people who control the trade become more powerful than governments. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, several organizations emerged to control this trade, but one would become more notorious, more violent, and more successful than all the others combined. They called it the Medellin Cartel, and the man who led it would become the most wanted criminal in the world. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born in 1949 in Rio Negro, Colombia, a small town outside Medellin. His family wasn't wealthy, but they weren't desperately poor either. His father was a farmer. His mother was a school teacher. By all accounts, she was deeply religious and instilled in Pablo a respect for family and a certain moral code.
Let me pause you right here. All right, because before we continue, I just want to know why when y'all speak on Pablo Escobar, y'all leave the fact, all right, y'all leave out the fact that it was Griselda Blanco who made him. Listen, motherfuckers keep thinking, oh, it's Pablo Escobar, and then what's this motherfucker from Mexico? All right, I'll be forgetting his name. Like, come on, man. Listen, Griselda Blanco, all right, was the one that started all this right here before Escobar. And it's wild. Like, listen, we got to go back in history a little bit, all right? We're going to have to go dive down the history, the rabbit hole of Griselda Blanco and Pablo Escobar.
Even though that code would become warped beyond recognition. As a teenager, Pablo was already showing the traits that would define him: intelligence, ambition, and a complete willingness to break the rules. He started small, stealing gravestones, sandblasting off the names, and reselling them. Then he moved to stealing cars. He was good at it. He was charming enough to talk his way out of trouble, and ruthless enough to do what needed to be done. In the early 1970s, Pablo got involved in smuggling. At first, it was contraband goods, cigarettes, electronics, anything that could be bought cheap in one place and sold for more in another. Then he graduated to marijuana. But in the mid-1970s, Pablo saw what some of his associates were doing with cocaine, and he understood immediately that this was different. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. Pablo started small in the cocaine business, working with others who had connections to Peru and Bolivia. But he was smart enough to see the whole picture. He realized that the real money wasn't in transportation. It was in controlling the entire supply chain from production to distribution. He started building relationships with coca growers. He set up processing labs in the Colombian countryside. He recruited pilots, chemists, and sicarios, hitmen who would handle the violent enforcement side of the business. By 1928, Pablo was one of several major cocaine traffickers in Medellin. The others included the Ochoa brothers, Jorge, Fabio, and Juan David, Carlos Lehra, and José Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. These men formed what would become known as the Medellin cartel, though it was never as formally organized as that name suggests. It was more like a federation of independent traffickers who cooperated when it suited them and competed when it didn't. But Pablo emerged as the most powerful among them, partly because of his business acumen and partly because of his willingness to use violence in ways that shocked even other criminals. Pablo had a simple philosophy that he supposedly expressed as plata o plomo, silver or lead. In other words, you could accept a bribe, silver, or take a bullet, lead. Those were your only options. Judges who wouldn't take bribes were assassinated. Police officers who couldn't be corrupted were killed. Journalists who wrote about the cartel were murdered. Politicians who opposed him faced attacks on themselves and their families. Between 1984 and 1993, it's estimated that the Medellin cartel was responsible for the deaths of over 4,000 people. That includes 3 Colombian presidential candidates, more than 200 judges, dozens of journalists, and over 1,000 police officers. But here's what made Pablo different from a typical crime boss.
What was that?
He cultivated a Robin Hood image among the poor in Medellin.
Yeah.
He built soccer fields in impoverished neighborhoods. He constructed housing for people living in slums.
Something he learned from Griselda.
He handed out cash to families in need. He built a zoo that people could visit for free. Was this genuine charity? Was it cynical public relations? Probably both. Pablo seemed to genuinely identify with the poor, seeing himself as someone who had risen from humble origins. But he also knew that community support made him harder to catch. When the police came looking for him, the people in the barrios would hide him and keep silent. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar was one of the richest men in the world. Forbes magazine listed him as the 7th wealthiest person on earth, with an estimated fortune of $30 billion. To put that in perspective, that's about $90 billion in today's money. For comparison, that would make him wealthier than Mark Zuckerberg or Larry Page.
That's wild. But I have a question. If Griselda Blanco wouldn't have gotten caught the way she got caught, would Pablo Escobar blew up the way he blew up? Because he was really her right-hand man. And he didn't really come up the way he came up until she got put away. You see where I'm coming from? That's what I'm saying. Like, they always, when they talk about him, they never mention the fact that he came from underneath Griselda Blanco. But if she would have never gotten caught because her man, that last boyfriend that she had snitched on her, would he have blown up this much to the point that, he was able to do that stuff? And I feel as though that he gave back to the community, right? As a way of, I'm killing the people in my own community. It was guilt. You see where I'm coming from? But he wanted that power. I felt like Pablo was like fighting demons on some real shit. He didn't like what he was doing, but he liked the power that he had.
The stories about Pablo's wealth are almost absurd. He allegedly spent 2,500 tolan per month just on rubber bands to wrap his cash. When his family was hiding in the mountains and his daughter got hypothermia, he burned $2 million in cash to keep her warm. He built a massive estate called Hacienda Nápoles, complete with a private zoo featuring hippos, elephants, and exotic birds. The hippos are still there. By the way, they've multiplied and are now an invasive species causing ecological problems in Colombia. But while Pablo was building his empire, the cocaine was pouring into the United States, and what was happening in Miami was unlike anything America had seen before. In 1980, Miami was transforming from a quiet retirement city into the cocaine capital of America. The Mariel boat lift that year brought 125,000 Cuban refugees to Miami, including a small number of criminals that Castro had released from prisons. This created chaos in an already overwhelmed city. But the real transformation was happening because of cocaine money. Traffickers were flying plane loads of cocaine into South Florida, landing on remote airstrips, dropping bundles into the ocean to be picked up by speedboats, and using every imaginable method to move product.
Yeah, listen. Cocaine smuggling wasn't some side hustle, all right, in the late 1950s. It was a whole damn operation, all right? Planes flying out of South America carrying base paste made from cocoa that indigenous people had farmed, all right, for centuries. They land in what is it, Brazil, Berlin, I forgot what it was, Mexico, and in Mexico, and creep their way into the States. Texas coastlines became, gateways. Small airfields, hitting in the middle of nowhere, dirt roads stretching like veins across farmland, fields leveled out just enough for a plane to touch down. And if you think it was sloppy, nah, it was strategic, all right? Some loads were dropped straight into the Gulf, all right? Floating bags lit up with, how can I say, strobes, blinking like the stars on the water, right? Boats would sweep in, scoop them up, and vanish into the night. The planes the gear, the whole operation, right? It carried a smell, sharp and chemical, all right? Almost sweet. Back then they used, how can I say, methyl ethyl, I think it's called ketone. I can't even say the word right. Methyl ethyl ketone. Listen, I can't even say the word right. All right. So let me search this up real quick so I can write the name for y'all real quick. 1 second. All right. But anyways, all right. They used that in either the production and the product was pure, spectacular, untouched. Right? According to them. Now, shit. I don't know what happened on some real shit. Shout out. Blessings. Thank you. Thanks for subscribing. Noza Babes TV. I appreciate you. I appreciate the support. All right. We got a new subscriber in the building. Let me see. The Little Jones taking too long. But yeah, man. Oh shit! I was supposed to drop the name.
They were making so much money that they literally didn't know what to do with it all. Banks in Miami were reporting suspicious activity because people were coming in with duffel bags full of cash, sometimes millions of dollars, wanting to make deposits. The Federal Reserve Bank in Miami had a cash surplus of $5 billion in the early 1980s, more than all other Federal Reserve branches combined. That money was coming from one source, cocaine. But with all that money came violence. Rival trafficking groups fought for territory. Deals went bad, debts went unpaid. And the solution, always, was murder. 1980 was the deadliest year in Miami's history. The homicide rate was the highest in the nation. The Dade County morgue ran out of space and had to rent a refrigerated trailer to handle the overflow of bodies.
That's wild.
On July 11th, 1979, in what became known as the Dadaland Mall Massacre, 2 hitmen walked into a liquor store in broad daylight with machine guns and killed 2 people in a cocaine-related dispute, spraying bullets in a shopping mall parking lot. It was like a war zone, except the combatants weren't soldiers. They were traffickers, dealers, and hitmen fighting over drug money. The woman who became the symbol of this era was Griselda Blanco,
Oh, he finally
Madrina, the Godmother, or the Black Widow.
Yep, they call her the Black Widow, yo. La Viuda Negra. All right, they got the novelas called the Viuda Negra. All right, that's how they made the novelas off of Griselda Blanco. But anyways, yo, he finally mentioned her. Finally, yo, first person that I hear mention Griselda Blanco, but you should have mentioned her before you told the story of Pablo. All right, because Pablo came from underneath her.
Griselda was one of the first major female cocaine traffickers.
Yep, cocaine
she was
godmother.
As ruthless as any of the men. She pioneered the use of motorcycle hitmen. sicarios who would pull up next to a car and open fire before disappearing into traffic. She allegedly ordered dozens of murders personally and was involved in distributing massive amounts of cocaine through Miami and New York. At the same time, the glamorous side of cocaine culture was reaching its peak. Studio 54 in New York was the ultimate symbol. The wealthy and famous, celebrities, musicians, politicians, models, would gather in this exclusive nightclub where cocaine flowed as freely as champagne. The drug had completely shed its early 1900s association with danger. Now it was associated with success, glamour, and excess. Movies like Scarface, 1983, portrayed the cocaine trade as dark and violent, but they also made it look exciting and powerful.
That's why
The
these young
disconnect
boys,
was striking. In Miami, people were dying in cocaine-related violence.
that's why these young boys be thinking that shit be cool now, man. Like on some real shit, you don't realize, right? A lot of these young boys be using the Scarface phrases. Say hello to my little friend, right? Like, come on, man. Like, people realize, like, right, these movies and the way they got these celebrities, right, these artists, these rappers, these lyricists rapping and singing, right? It is not really meant for us. Like, listen, rap ain't the way it used to be on some real shit, all right? And R&B doesn't even exist no more. Nope, it doesn't. I mean, Toni Braxton does her thing still. Tamar does her thing still. All right, Sammy tried to bring it back a little bit. R&B don't even exist no more on some real shit. Hip hop, you can't even tell if hip hop is rap or rap is hip hop. The fuck? And some of these rappers can't even rap. But anyways, back on topic.
In Manhattan, people were using cocaine in luxury apartments and penthouse parties, completely disconnected from the bloodshed their demand was creating. Back in Colombia, the violence was intensifying. In 1984, Colombian Justice Minister Rodrigo Lara Bonilla, who had been vocal about fighting the cartels, was assassinated by Medellin cartel hitmen on a motorcycle in Bogotá. This was a turning point. The Colombian government, under pressure from the United States, began to take the cartels seriously as a threat to national security. At the same time, the Reagan administration in the United States declared an all-out war on drugs. Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign became famous, though many critics pointed out that telling people to just refuse drugs didn't address the underlying issues of addiction or the economic forces driving the trade.
Exactly.
The DEA ramped up operations in Colombia. Extradition treaties were signed, allowing Colombian traffickers to be sent to the United States to face.
I'm gonna rewind it back so we can hear that, right? But it's crazy how they say just say no to drugs, right? I understand that, right? And back then it was like they didn't get what they was, what they was doing and what they was getting into, right? So I feel as though that phrase was said a little, ahead of time. I have a question, right? It's hard to tell an addict to say no to drugs, but Maya Angelou always said, right? You know better, you do better. So what's going on now? All right, we've hit 2025, about to go into 2026, right? And people know what drugs do to you, but yet they still choose to indulge in them. Did I ask the right question? Or am I asking a stupid question?
Address the underlying issues of addiction or the economic forces driving the trade. The DEA ramped up operations in Colombia. Extradition treaties were signed, allowing Colombian traffickers to be sent to the United States to face trial, something the cartel leaders desperately wanted to avoid. Pablo Escobar responded to this pressure not by backing down, but by escalating the violence. In November 1985, the M19 guerrilla group, allegedly with funding from the Medellin cartel, stormed the Palace of Justice in Bogotá and held the Supreme Court justices hostage. The Colombian army responded by attacking the building. The resulting battle killed over 100 people, including 11 Supreme Court justices. Half of the case files against the Medellin cartel were destroyed in the fire that followed. This was the pattern. Every time the government pushed the cartel pushed back with even more extreme violence. Judges, politicians, journalists, anyone who opposed them was a target. In 1989, the Medellin cartel bombed Avianca Flight 203,
Damn.
killing all 111 people on board, 101 passengers, and 6 crew members, plus 3 people on the ground, in an attempt to kill a single presidential candidate who wasn't even on the plane. They bombed the DAS building, Colombian intelligence headquarters, in Bogota, killing 52 people and injuring over 1,000. They declared war on the Colombian state itself, but the violence was also taking a toll on Pablo's operations. International pressure was mounting. Colombian forces were getting better at finding his labs and disrupting his supply chains.
Yo, you can't make money in the middle of war, see? So I don't even understand why they set up these war situations if you're not even making money. Right? Like, one thing that I have learned, they say that America's in debt. I feel as though all countries are in debt on some real shit. And they use these wars and all this as tactics to, push this money out on us. All right. Like, that's why I say shout out to Papa Duck. All right. When he says money is an illusion, all right, money's not real. I understand what he means by that. All right. And hopefully y'all do. So, like, listen, before, everything got colonized, money didn't exist and people survived.
And within Colombia, a growing number of people, even in Medellin, were tired of the violence. By 1991, Pablo saw that he couldn't sustain the war indefinitely, so he did something that seemed crazy. He negotiated his own surrender. The deal was this: Pablo would turn himself in, but he would be imprisoned in a facility of his own design, with his own guards, and the Colombian government would agree not to extradite him to the United States. In June 1991, Pablo walked into La Catedral, a luxurious prison he had built on a hillside near Medellin.
His own prison
had a soccer field, a bar, a jacuzzi, and luxurious bedrooms. Pablo continued running his operations from inside.
How was that even a prison? A prison where you have parties, you got TVs, you do whatever the hell you want to do. I mean, but don't they still do that anyways?
He held parties. He ordered murders of rivals from his prison cell/mansion. It was imprisonment in name only. But in July 1992, when the Colombian government found out that Pablo had tortured and killed 2 of his own associates inside La Catedral, they decided to transfer him to a real prison. Pablo got advance warning. Before the army arrived, he and his associates simply walked out of La Catedral and disappeared. The largest manhunt in history was about to begin. For 16 months, Pablo Escobar was on the run. The Colombian government formed an elite task force called the Search Block, dedicated solely to finding him. The United States sent DEA agents and provided surveillance technology. A shadowy vigilante group called Los Pepes, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar, emerged, allegedly made up of former cartel members and paramilitaries who began systematically killing Pablo's associates and destroying his properties. There's strong evidence that Los Pepes had connections to Colombian intelligence, the DEA, and the Cali cartel, Pablo's rivals who saw an opportunity to eliminate him by cooperating with his enemies. Pablo moved constantly, never staying in one place for more than a night or two. He communicated with his family by phone, but he knew the calls were being traced, so he kept them short. By late 1993, Pablo was isolated. Most of his top associates were dead or in prison. His fortune, once estimated at $30 billion, had been mostly seized or destroyed. He was no longer the powerful kingpin. He was a fugitive, paranoid, and desperate.
That's crazy.
On December 2nd, 1993, Pablo made a mistake. He
He
stayed on a phone call too long, just long enough for the Search Block's equipment to triangulate his position. They traced the signal to a middle-class neighborhood in Medellin, to a house on a narrow street. The Search Block surrounded the building. Pablo and one bodyguard tried to escape across the rooftops. The details of what happened next are disputed. The official story is that Pablo was shot during the chase. But some investigators later claimed the bullet that killed him entered at a downward angle, suggesting he was executed after capture rather than killed in a shootout. Either way, at 3:15 p.m. on December 2nd, 1993, Pablo Escobar was dead. The photograph of his body, lying on a clay-tiled roof, barefoot, blood streaming from his head, was broadcast around the world. In Colombia, people celebrated in the streets. The nightmare, they thought, was finally over. But here's the thing about killing a kingpin. It doesn't kill the industry. In some ways, it makes it worse. When you cut off the head of a drug cartel, 3 more grow in its place.
Facts. It's not like chopping the head off of a snake on some real shit. It's like in politics, right? Like in the health insurance situation when what is that? Mangioli, whatever his name was, all right, when he sat here and shot the bull, right? The CEO. I'm sitting here like, dude, there was no point in doing that. All right. He's gonna get replaced by a whole nother motherfucker that can do his job now. And probably worse than him. Right, all these mofos get replaced by somebody, and nobody even realizes that part. So cutting the head off the snake in these situations is not like in the movies, all right? This is not the vampire, all right? This is not a vampire movie. This is not some type of, I don't know how to explain, like virus movie, like on some real shit. This is real life. We got Mr. Oates in the building, man. Shout out to Mr. Oates. Welcome to the live, Mr. Oates.
This is what became known as the kingpin strategy paradox. The idea seemed logical. Arrest or kill the leaders of drug trafficking organizations, and the organizations will fall apart. But that's not what happened. When the Medellin cartel collapsed after Pablo's death, the Cali cartel immediately expanded to fill the void. The Cali cartel, led by the Rodriguez Orejuela brothers, was more sophisticated and corporate in its approach. They wore suits instead of guns. They bribed rather than bombed. They preferred corruption to confrontation. But they were just as powerful, and they controlled just as much cocaine. By 1995, the Cali cartel was responsible for about 80% of the cocaine entering the United States. Then, between 1995 and 1996, Colombian and US authorities arrested the Cali cartel leaders. Problem solved, right?
No. Problem ain't solved, all right? Listen. Here's the truth, all right? Look at it now. What once came through with clarity and, potency, all right, has been cut, chopped, diluted with the strongest assortments of, filters. What people are buying today ain't blow, all right? It's a Frankenstein mix of whatever scrap someone could throw in. All right, the purity is gone. The ritual is gone. The respect for the leaf is gone. What's left is a hustle, all right, that doesn't care about quality, doesn't care about culture, doesn't care about people. It only cares about profit. And that's the bigger story, all right? The system took something sacred, turned it into, commodity, then poisoned it with greed. The smuggling, the smuggling routes tell you everything. Planes, boats, dirt roads, strobes, all right, in the Gulf. It wasn't just about moving product. It was about building empires. And now, decades later, the empire still stands, but the product is trash. The war on drugs didn't kill cocaine. It killed the truth about it. It killed the respect for it. It killed the communities caught in the middle of it. So when I talk about this, I'm not glorifying the past. I'm exposing the hypocrisy because what was once pure has been corrupted, and what was once sacred has been, demonetized. All right. And the people who, profit off their corruptions, same gatekeepers, different uniforms. But people don't notice that part. Real shit.
Because when the Cali cartel fell, dozens of smaller organizations emerged. The Norte del Valle cartel, the North Coast cartel, independent trafficking groups in different regions, and crucially, Mexican cartels, which had been working as transporters for the Colombians, realized they could cut out the middleman and control the trade themselves. The Sinaloa cartel, the Gulf cartel, the Juarez cartel, and others began taking over the cocaine trade. They had the advantage of geography. They controlled the US-Mexico border, the final and most important checkpoint in the smuggling route. By the 2000s, Mexican cartels had become the dominant force in cocaine trafficking, and the violence in Mexico exploded. Between 2006 and 2020, drug-related violence in Mexico has killed an estimated 350,000 people.
Damn, I forgot. Yeah, in Mexico, a lot of shit happened after Pablo Escobar, passed. Like, yeah, after he did. Yeah, it happened after he passed. I forgot. Now I remember his damn name. El freaking Chapo. El Chapo is the one that rose after Escobar went down. First it was Griselda, then it was Escobar, then it was Chapo.
That's more than the total number of American casualties in World War II. The cartels don't just kill each other. They kill journalists, politicians, police officers, and civilians. Entire towns have been terrorized. Mass graves with hundreds of bodies have been discovered. The kingpin strategy was deployed again. Raid after raid, arrest after arrest. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, leader of the Sinaloa cartel, was captured in 2014, escaped from prison in 2015, was recaptured in 2016, and extradited to the US in 2017. He's now serving life in a US supermax prison. But the Sinaloa cartel didn't disappear. It fractured into competing factions, each fighting for control. The violence intensified. Meanwhile, new cartels emerged. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, became one of the most powerful and violent criminal organizations in the world, operating not just in Mexico, but in Europe, Asia, and across Latin America. Today, cocaine production is at an all-time high. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, global cocaine production in 2021 reached 1,982 metric tons, the highest level ever recorded. Peru and Colombia are producing more coca than they did during Pablo Escobar's era. More arrests, more violence, more cocaine. The war on drugs, launched by Nixon in the 1970s and escalated by Reagan in the 1980s, has cost over $1 trillion. It has incarcerated millions of people, disproportionately people of color. It has militarized police forces. It has destabilized entire countries. And by every measurable metric, cocaine availability, purity, price, it has failed to stop the drug trade. In fact, cocaine today is cheaper and more pure than it was in the 1980s. So where are we today in 2025? The cocaine trade is more sophisticated, more violent, and more global than ever before. Colombian and Peruvian production feeds Mexican cartels, who move cocaine into the United States through tunnels, submarines, drones, and hidden compartments in legitimate cargo. From there, it's distributed through complex networks into cities across America. But there's a new crisis layered on top of the cocaine problem: fentanyl contamination. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that's about 50 times stronger than heroin and 100 times stronger than morphine. It's cheap to produce, easy to smuggle because it's so potent you need very little, and it's being mixed into cocaine, often without the user's knowledge. People who think they're buying or using cocaine are accidentally overdosing on fentanyl.
And that's a fact. And you know what's crazy, right? Now, it's not just on cocaine, it's on heroin, all right? The fentanyl is they use it on the heroin. They're putting it in the weed now, all right? Somehow, some way, all right, they managed to even get this shit into the vape pens, all right, where people, smoke the THC or smoke the nicotine, like whether they think they're smoking a cigarette or a Dutch, you see where I'm coming from? But in a pen, all right, in liquid form. Listen, somehow, some way, how they did it, don't ask me, all right? We did a live on it, all right? But to me, it's kind of like I feel as though it's more of an inside job than an outside job. Because how in the world did y'all get the fentanyl into the damn vape pens and shit like that? You see what I'm saying? It's like, no. Before this shit hit the smoke shops, somebody got the damn fentanyl in that damn pen. So that's more of an inside job. But people say I'm tripping on that part. I don't think so. Like, really do your research and you see why I'm saying the way I'm saying.
In 2021, over 24,000 Americans died from overdoses involving cocaine. Many of those deaths involved fentanyl contamination. The cartels are also diversifying. They're not just trafficking cocaine anymore. They're moving fentanyl, methamphetamine, heroin, and marijuana, though marijuana legalization in the US has cut into their profits there. They're involved in human smuggling, extortion, and even legal industries like avocado farming. The Jalisco New Generation cartel, for example, operates in over 30 Mexican states and has a presence in more than 20 countries. They use military-grade weapons, encrypted communications, and sophisticated money laundering operations. They're not just a criminal organization. They're a multinational corporation that happens to be illegal. And here's what's particularly challenging. The demand isn't going away. As long as millions of people in the United States and Europe want cocaine, someone will supply it. The profit margins are too high. The demand is too consistent. Arrest one trafficker, and 10 more are willing to take the risk.
Well, shit. Listen, man. Out of all the drugs they sell out here, one thing I'm going to sit here and say, I don't even know how is it that people in the hood afford cocaine. All right? Because them Jones start off from $20 a pop on up. Right? Real shit. The heroin, $10 a pop on up. So I'm even trying to figure out how is it that people in the hood, right, in poverty, that really don't have no money, all right, can live the lifestyle of a rich person. But what's crazy is you got a lot of people out here that's on cocaine, right? I call them, how can I say? It's a word for it. They taught me the word, all right? I forgot what it was. Oh. I call them functional addicts, all right? Because I'm trying to figure out how the hell you be hitting the line every night and every morning, but you go to work. How the hell you hit that pipe, right? And you go to work. Well, I see other addicts that are doing the same thing you, buying the same or as much as you, and you're functioning at work. So there's some addicts out here that are functional, and I'm just trying to figure out how the fuck is you functional? You must have did the ritual the ancestors did.
For that kind of money. So what's the solution? Some countries have started experimenting with different approaches. Portugal decriminalized all drug possession in 2001, treating addiction as a public health issue rather than a criminal justice problem. Overdose deaths dropped. HIV infections from needle sharing dropped. Drug use didn't increase the way critics predicted. Some US states and cities have opened supervised injection sites where people can use drugs under medical supervision.
Which I'm against. I'm against those clinics. All right. They trying to do it here in Philadelphia. Hopefully they fail that shit. All right, because all y'all gonna do is create more fucking addicts. All right. Y'all sitting here giving them the drugs. Let's make it make sense. Y'all saying y'all doing this to keep the streets clean. All right. Bullshit. Because they'll still come out and do that shit somewhere else. As crazy as it sounds, that's why we're seeing more addicts within our communities, all right? We're seeing these, listen, never once growing up in North Philadelphia did I see fucking heroin addicts, all right, walking within my community, all right? Never once did I see that, but now we're seeing that shit a lot, especially when the pandemic hit us. We're seeing that a lot. We're seeing we've seen these addicts out here buy these rocks, right? Put it in the pipe. And in the middle of the street, all right, they're not shameful. They bold as shit, light that shit and smoke that shit, and then walk around weird as shit. The heroin addicts, when they shoot that joint up in their vein, looking like they're giving themselves heads in the middle of the streets, about to get hit by cars. They used to be somewhere in the Ducky over there in Kensington, somewhere in the Ducky over there in York Road, but now, nah, man, they're everywhere. All right, listen, the prostitutes in the park right there in York Road, All right. They used to be in York Road. They wouldn't move from there, but now you're starting to see them right in the middle of the park and broad daylight. My bad. Like, come on, man. These addictions, the situation is not getting better. HIV has not reduced. It's getting worse. There's people out here actually giving people HIV on purpose because they're mad on some revenge type shit. So let's be real. So what did he say again?
Supervision, reducing overdose deaths, and connecting users with treatment services. There's growing conversation about whether some form of legalization and regulation, treating cocaine like alcohol or tobacco, with heavy restrictions and taxation, might actually reduce the violence and death toll associated with prohibition. The argument goes like this: prohibition creates a black market. Black markets can't use legal means to resolve disputes, so they use violence. If you legalize and regulate, you eliminate the black market, which eliminates the cartel's power. The counter-argument is that cocaine is inherently dangerous and addictive, and legalization would increase use and addiction rates. It's not a simple question, and reasonable people disagree. What's clear is that the current approach, criminalization, enforcement, interdiction, has not worked. It's created mass incarceration, destabilized countries, and filled prisons without significantly reducing cocaine availability. The story of cocaine is a story of unintended consequences. Well-meaning doctors thought they'd found a miracle medicine. They created an addiction crisis. Racist politicians thought they could control black communities by criminalizing cocaine. They created a massive, violent black market. Law enforcement thought they could stop the cartels by arresting the leaders. They created more cartels. At every step, the intentions were one thing and the results were another. So let's come back to where we started. A plant that grew in the Andes for thousands of years, used respectfully by indigenous peoples as medicine and sacred ritual, discovered by Europeans who isolated its active compound and turned it into a commercial product, marketed as a miracle cure and added to everything from wine to soda. Then demonized and criminalized in a campaign that was as much about racism and control as it was about public health, pushed into the black market, where it became the foundation of violent cartels that killed hundreds of thousands of people. And today, still here, still causing deaths, still generating billions of dollars, still as available as it's ever been. The story of cocaine is really a story about us. It's about how we decide what's acceptable and what's forbidden, about how economic incentives shape behavior more powerfully than laws, about how prohibition can sometimes create more harm than the thing it's trying to prohibit.
That's true. But see, I like to go more by, what Maya Angelou said. You know better, you do better. We already in 2025, right? And we know what these drugs do to us. So instead of indulging in them, all right, refuse them, reject them. Why can't people do that? Y'all know that this drug is going to do this, and there's a 99.99 chance of you becoming addicted to this drug, and yet you still do it. Why? You wasn't an addict until you decided to indulge in this, knowing what the consequences behind taking this drug was. I'm just saying. You see where I'm coming from? Like, I'm just asking the questions that, I don't know, I'm guessing people are scared to ask, but we should be asking them. For real. Like I said earlier, all right, they told us we were less. They told us, to shrink. They told, they told us to fold ourselves, all right, into boxes, not onto boxes, all right, into boxes too small for our spirit, all right, too tight for our truth. They sold us lies dressed up as, limits and expected us to wear them like chains. All right, but let me be clear. Like I said earlier, we're not what they said we were. We're not the scraps they tried to feed us. We're not the shadows they tried to keep us in. We are the fire that burns through the bullshit. We are the proof All right, that survival ain't just survival, it's transformation. Every scar, every bruise, every time they tried to silence us, we turned it into rhythm, into voice, into movement. They said we were broken, but we became architects of our own healing. They said we were weak, but we became warriors, all right, with laughter sharp enough to cut through their hypocrisy. Real shit.
Yeah, we living in a world where the rules don't apply. They say we gotta follow, but we ready to fly. System got us boxed in, trying to keep us small. But we rise like the phoenix, we ain't scared to brawl. They feeding us lies, but we see through the smoke. We're the voice of the people, we're ready to provoke. They want us to divide, but we're stronger as one. It's breaking chains, taking names, yeah, we getting it done. It's us versus the system, we're breaking the mold. It's in the air, yeah, we taking control. No more silence, no more fear. Together we rise, let them know we're here. Riders ignite. In the world of division, they showed us how to share. But the weight of our sorrows, they never taught us to bear. We split our joys and laughter, but the pain remained untold. A burden we carry alone, a story left untold. They taught us to split everything, but not the heavy pain. It lingers in the shadows, a darkness we can't explain. We're left with shattered pieces, trying to mend what's lost. They taught us how to split everything, but not the heavy cost. We learned to divide our dreams and multiply our fears, but the ache in our hearts only grew with passing years. They gave us all the answers, except how to heal. The scars that run so deep means the time can't see. Yeah, they taught us how to share, but only the good. Smiles and laughter like we understood, but deep down inside there's a storm we hide. Pain in our hearts, we're just trying to ride. Put on a mask, yeah, we play the part, but nobody sees the cracks in the hearts. We share our dreams, the highs and the lows, but when it comes to hurt, we just close the doors. We share the fun times, deflect the pain, laughing in the sunshine, dancing in the rain. But the shadows linger, they creep and they crawl, breaking us down, but we don't share it all. We got hate in our hearts, but we keep concealed. Taught to share the joy, but wounds, they stay unhealed. They say love was easy to divide, but the heartache never subsides. We tried to split everything into two, but the pain lingers strong and true. Shared our dreams, divided our fears, but the sorrow remained through the years. No matter how we tried to let go, the weight of our suffering continued to grow. Now we're apart trying to heal, but some wounds are too deep to conceal. They said splitting up will set us free, yet the pain lingers in you and me. And they roll where rules are set in stone, the system's grip tightens, we're not alone. Bound by chains of injustice greed. Against the odds, we fight to be free. Mighty forces try to keep us down, but our spirits rise, refusing to drown. Defying norms, breaking through the mold. In this battle of wills, our story is told. As the clash continues day by day, we stand united, come what may. For in this world where rules don't apply, our strength and unity will never die. They try to silence our dreams, but we're loud and clear. With every step forward, conquering fear. They can't hold us back. We're the fire and the flame in this battle for freedom. We're all in the game. They say it's just a game, but we're playing for keeps. With the strength of the many, we're shattered elites. No more puppets on strings, we're cutting the ties. With our eyes on the prize, we're reaching for the skies. So let's stand together, let's break down the walls. In this fight for our future, we'll answer the calls. From the ashes, we'll rise like a storm. Riders ignite. It's us versus the system, and we're ready to fight. They're building walls, but we're digging tunnels. With every step we take, we're shaking the bundles. From the streets to the courts, we're raising our voice. In a world full of noise, we're making the choice. They want to keep us blind, but we see the light. Knowledge is power, and we're ready to fight. From the corners of the city to the halls of the state, where the heartbeat of the struggle can't afford to wait. It's us versus the system, we're breaking the mold. It's in the air, yeah, we're taking control. No more silence, no more fear. Together we rise, let them know we're here. Riders ignite. They taught us to split everything, but not the heavy pain. It lingers in the shadows, a darkness we can't explain. We're left with shattered pieces, trying to mend what's lost. They taught us how to split everything, but not the heavy cost. Now we stand here broken, searching for some light, hoping for a way out of this never-ending night. But through it all, we find strength in each other's embrace. Together we'll face tomorrow and find solace in this space. They say don't bring the drama, keep it all light. But every night I'm fighting these demons in sight. Whispers in my mind, yeah, they echo when they shout. While I'm smiling on the surface, I'm breaking without. We're sharing the laughter, but what's underneath? A battlefield of sorrow, a war with no peace. We're warriors in silence, but nobody knows how the pain that we carry just grows and it grows. And it world Lessons learned, they taught us how to stand and burn. But the scars we hide deep inside are the ones that never subside. We followed all rules they made, but the emptiness never fades. Their wounds like knives, cutting through even wounds that always grew. They painted pictures of success, but couldn't fix what's left from us. Now we're left to bear the strain of the pain that lingers, never wanes. It's us versus the system. We're breaking the mold. That's in the air. Yeah, we're taking control. No more silence, no more fear. Together we rise. Let them know we're here. Riders ignite. So remember this moment. Remember this face. Remember this sound. We're the voice of the future, and we won't back down. In the face of oppression, we'll stand up tall. It's us versus the system.
I see we got some disrespectful people in the chat, man. I had to block somebody real quick, man. Listen. I just don't understand the irony of people, man. Like, I really don't. Like, but we don't deal with the disrespect over here. Like, some people need to carry themselves. I don't care if you're straight, all right? I don't care if you how can I say, having on a rainbow? I don't care if you're trans, all right? But respect yourself. You want to be respected, respect yourself, all right? Because how you come online, right, and carry yourself is how others is going to treat you on some real shit. And if you come on this John, all right, acting like a lot lizard, a clown, all right, how can I say, auditioning for the circus, that's what you're going to get treated as on some real shit. But back on topic, all right, because we're about to, jump into another topic real quick, all right, and this one's about to be on George Washington, all right. But listen, we just went down the rabbit hole. We're gonna pick up on another part soon, all right, on the cocaine business. All right. Now that we just sat here and we broke that joint down, the rise and fall, of the cocaine from Coca-Cola to the cartel happened. We're going to jump into the first election. All right. So, let's talk about it. All right, let's break it down. All right. Let's talk about history for a second. Because if you think elections have always been about, rallies, debates, and endless ads, think again. All right. The election of George Washington in 1789 was weird. I'm not going to sit here and lie. Like, it's been weird like every other election, but I never really thought about it, right? Until all this stuff that's happening now has been happening. All right. But listen, that election to me was weird because listen, they had no campaigning, no parties, no conventions, no primaries, just a handful of men chosen by state legislators, all right, writing down writing down two names, right, on a ballot. That's it. Election day wasn't even, in November. It was in January back then. All right. Voting stretched from December 1788 into January 1789. And the Electoral College wasn't a rubber stamp back then. It was taken seriously as the, how can I say, actual mechanism of choice. Out of 13 states, only 10 participated. New York, all right, New York was disqualified because its legislator couldn't, agree on electors. While North Carolina and Rhode Island hadn't, how can I say, ratified the Constitution yet. All right, that left 69 electors casting votes. And here's the kicker. All right, there was only one real issue at stake: whether the Constitution itself should, stand or be, scrapped. Washington wasn't just being picked as president. He was being picked as the living symbol of unity, right? The man who could hold together a fragile experiment. He won, how can I say, anonymously. Every single elector writing his name down, right? No president since has entered office with that kind of universal mandate. On some real shit. All right. So let's break down the myth. People, listen, I'm gonna put it like this. People act like politics has always been messy campaigns, all right, mudslinging and party lines. But the first election was about survival, not, spectacle. It was about whether this country would even exist. And the irony, right? Today we fight over crumbs, over parties, over personalities, while back then the fight was whether the whole damn system would collapse before it even begun. All right? Like, listen, election year back then was 1788 to 1789. All right? Voted and ran from December 15th to January 7th. States excluded were New York. They were disqualified. North Carolina and Rhode Island hadn't, ratified their constitution. And they only had 69, how can I say, 69 cast ballots out of 72 possible. And the result of it was, that Washington was unanimously elected. 69 votes. Only election where a state was disqualified. That's crazy. They really didn't let New York vote. And the only main issue, I feel as though, right, to me, in my opinion, was the survival of the Constitution itself. So let's dive into this video. Before we dive into this video, all right, I'm going to put this on real quick.
Religiously, understand the seven principles of hell. You understand the seven demons within you. You understand the whole concept. There's a whole metaphysical concept. We ain't go over that, but it ain't. But anyway, so.
All right, y'all. Let's get right into it. All right. And let's see what this video is about. The election of George Washington. All right. Was weirder than you think. And it really was. So I'm glad I'm not the only one that thinks of it and that thinks like that.
Americans do presidential elections today. In 1789, there were no official candidates. There was no campaigning for the office. There were no political parties, no nominating conventions, no primary elections. The entire election season was very short. And the major issue of this election was the Constitution itself, whether the very system that they were using as the basis for the election, whether they would keep the system. Okay, well, you might be thinking, why were they electing a president for the first time in 1789? Didn't they declare independence in 1776? What were they doing for those 13 years? Well, they didn't have a president during those 13 years. It's important to remember that the United States of America was not originally a single country. It was a collection of 13 separate countries.
Yep.
The 13 colonies that were participating in the rebellion had each been separate from each other, distinct colonies with ties between themselves and Britain, but not really ties amongst themselves between the different colonies. So when the 13 colonies declared their independence, they did so not as a single unified country, but as 13 separate countries in association with each other, what we would today call an international organization, in order to accomplish their common goal of freeing themselves from British rule. There was only one branch of government, effectively, on the federal level, which was the Continental Congress. Although to call it the federal level is a stretch, because there wasn't a federal government, so to speak. Anything that the Continental Congress decided to do had to be enforced by the states. And if a state did not want to enforce it, they didn't have to. Some people at the time saw this as a problem, and they thought that the states would be better off if they entered into a closer union with each other. This was mainly for financial reasons, but I'm not going to get into that.
Why not?
So they held a constitutional convention in Philadelphia in 1787, which they drafted the Constitution that we use today in the United States. Now, this new Constitution was different from the way it had been before. So under the old system, you had one branch of government, the Continental Congress. In this new system, there were three branches of government. There was the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. The legislative branch would consist of Congress, but now Congress would have two separate houses, a House of Representatives, which would represent the people directly, and the Senate, which would represent the states. And then the executive branch would be headed by a president. And then under him would be everyone who is in charge of executing the laws passed by Congress. And then the judicial branch was headed by the Supreme Court, and then there would be various courts underneath the Supreme Court. So one of the questions that the framers of the Constitution had to answer was, how are they going to get the president chosen?
Right.
Now, one obvious choice would be to have him chosen by Congress. That would essentially make it a parliamentary system. Like in most English-speaking countries, there's a parliamentary system where Parliament decides who the prime minister is going to be, and the prime minister runs the government. The framers of the Constitution did not want to do that. And by framers, I mean the men who met in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 and drafted the Constitution. They're called framers, the framers. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to maintain a strict separation between the executive branch and the legislative branch.
Why?
So that was off the table. So how else could they elect the president? Well, one option, which is the option I think most Americans today would take for granted, was that the president would be elected directly by the voters. The framers of the
How is it that people take it for granted? It's just that people see through the bullshit. It's not that people take it for granted, all right? They see right through the smoke. It's like in reality, nowadays, our vote don't really matter. We put the votes in, but the president gets voted in due through the electoral college votes, not because of our votes. You see, like, man, listen, that'll be a topic for another day. Because listen,
Constitution also didn't like that idea. They thought that would be not practical to do that, and also not wise. So the framers hit upon another system that was neither of those two things. What they would have would be the famous electoral college, this body of individuals who exist within the executive branch, so you don't have to worry about cross-contamination with the legislative branch. And the electoral college's only job was every 4 years they would elect the president. Now, how do you choose the members of the electoral college? Well, they just left that up to the states. However the states wanted to do that. If the state legislature wanted to choose their electors, they could do that. If the state legislature wanted to leave that up to the voters to decide, they could do that too. So the American presidential election has two stages. First, you have to choose the electors. And then once the electors are chosen, they choose the president. That's still the system that's used in the US today. And when Americans go to the polls in early November of an election year, they're voting for electors. And then the electors meet, nowadays it's in the middle of December, and they cast their votes for president. And that's the actual election of the president. So what we...
Yep, it's no different. That's what I'm saying. Like the real, listen, when I tell people vote locally, I say it for a reason, right? Because in reality, the ones that we're supposed to be voting for is the governors, the senators, the judges, the DAs, the council people, the Congress people, all that. We're supposed to be voting for them, right? But people don't go to these polls to vote for them. They go to vote for the president. And that's why I constantly say that when it comes to our president, right, the president of the United States, voting him in, our votes really don't matter. Where they do matter is getting these other politicians in, right? But people don't go to those polls and vote when it's time to vote, all right? So automatically, because there's only a few votes, right? Automatically, they get, they pick who's going to go into office. Not enough people show up, all right, to these polls when it's time to vote for, the senators and all of them, the mayors, the governors. Not enough people go. But this is something that, listen, in a way was taught to us in school, but was twisted up. You had to do your own research as you got older, all right, if you understand where I'm coming from. A lot of people just don't remember, all right? We was taught about the three branches and the presidential elections and much more, all right? But somehow, some way, it's like we're in an episode of It, Welcome to Dairy, all right? And as we got older and, parted ways, went our ways, moved out the city, did our thing, we forgot.
For electors. And then the electors meet, nowadays it's in the middle of December, and they cast their votes for president, and that's the actual election of the president. So what we call election day is actually the election of the electors. The Constitution gives Congress the power to decide when each of those elections happens, when the electors are elected and when the president is elected. Nowadays, it's early November and mid-December. In this first election in 1789, the election of electors happened on January 7th, and then the electors would meet and choose the president on February 4th, 1789. So election day in 1789 was January 7th. That was what we would call election day. Now, some online sources will say that this particular presidential election happened over 2 years, 1788, 89. It's not quite true. The election was January 7th, 1789. It was just in 1789. Where that's kind of true is in 2 states, in New Hampshire and Massachusetts. They actually had a 2-stage process for choosing their electors. They would have voters essentially nominate who they would want to have as electors, and then the state legislature would choose from a list that the voters sent up to the legislature. So
Kind of like what they're
both
doing
New
today.
Hampshire and Massachusetts, the voters went to the polls. Polls isn't the right word. The voters went to their town meetings and voted for who they'd like to be elector. And then those names went to the state legislature. And on January 7th, the state legislature picked from among that list. But in the other states that participated in the election, it was just January 7th, 1789.
And now it's a combination and all that put together. And I know because I've been at the polls. I know, the process. You see, I know how it works, right? Like, I'm the one there, putting the ballots into the shelves, organizing things, making sure everything is good, much more, blah, 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 along with others, all right? I'm not the only one there. But anyways, right, like, that right there hasn't really changed. It's still being done. And if you've ever worked at the, polls on election time, right, y'all know exactly what I'm talking about.
Now, there were 11 states that participated in the election of 1789. Rhode Island and North Carolina had rejected the Constitution and therefore were technically not part of the United States and not participating in the election. In 5 of the states, the state legislatures chose the electors. In 4 of the states, the electors were chosen directly by the voters. And then in 2 other states, they had a hybrid system. Now, let's take a minute and look at the states that did direct elections, because they did it differently in the different states. In Pennsylvania and Delaware, they had statewide elections, meaning in Pennsylvania, wherever you were in the state, if you were voting in the election, you voted for 10 names. And then the top 10 vote getters statewide would become elector. Delaware did the same thing, but they had 3 electors. So wherever you were statewide, you voted for 3 names. In Maryland, it was also statewide. Everybody wrote down 8 names because Maryland got 8 electors. But Maryland had a rule where 5 of the names had to come from the Western Shore and 3 of the names from the Eastern Shore. Virginia did it a little bit differently because the Virginia legislature actually created electoral districts. Virginia got 12 electoral votes. And so the legislature divided the state up into 12 electoral districts. Each one would elect 1 elector. And these were distinct from the 10 congressional districts that Virginia had. Virginia was the only state to do it this way. So looking at the different states and the way they did it, that reflects the politics of the different states. So Pennsylvania, for example, the Pennsylvania legislature was dominated by Federalists, meaning people who were pro-Constitution. Support for the Constitution tended to be stronger in the cities. So they thought by making it a statewide ballot, it would make it more likely for Federalists to be elected as elector. The Virginia legislature was dominated by anti-Federalists, people who were opposed to the new Constitution. And they wanted to improve the rural vote. And so they drew districts to make it more likely that rural people would be elected as electors. And rural people were more likely to be opposed to the Constitution.
Sure. That's why. And Philadelphia hasn't changed. They have not changed. Joe, I'm not going to sit here. Listen, let's talk about it. All right. How even the first election had schemes baked into it. All right. The final results are, regardless of anything, George Washington walked away with 69 electoral votes. Every single one. All right. John Adams came in second with 34, making him vice president. But here's the twist. Adams should have had way more, at least 49 votes. The 70, that's 71% of the electors, but he didn't. Why? Because Alexander Hamilton, yes, the same Hamilton they turned into, a Broadway hero, was already playing games. All right. Hamilton cooked up a plan to keep Adams from, looking too powerful. He convinced electors who wanted Adams to throw their second votes to, other candidates instead. That way, Washington, anonymous win looked clean, and Adams got knocked down, a little peg. instead of 71% Adams limped in with 49%. That's not just math, all right? That's manipulation. But let's continue. I'm probably a little ahead of him. And that's because, man, I've been diving down rabbit holes for a good minute already, all right? I've been connecting these dots. Listen, all right, my bad. Random thoughts came up. Let's continue.
And this touches on the big issue of the presidential election that year, which was the Constitution itself, whether the Constitution was even a good idea. It was extremely controversial in a way that I think most Americans today probably don't really realize.
You, Mr. Oates.
There were a lot of people who were opposed to the Constitution at the time, and the passage of the Constitution was quite controversial in several states. Some Americans felt like the Constitution was a betrayal of the goals of the Revolutionary War. They felt like they had traded one tyranny for another. They'd gotten rid of the tyranny of the British Parliament and the British monarchy, and they had now were instituting a new tyranny of a new federal system. A lot of Americans, especially in rural areas and out in the western areas, were afraid that this new federal system would be opposed to their own interests, that the federal government would be dominated by commercial interests from the port cities and would make policy decisions that would financially benefit the big port cities and disadvantage rural areas. In fact, this controversy between those who favor the Constitution and those who are opposed to it ended up making it so that New York could not participate in the presidential election at all, because the New York legislature was divided. The upper house, the Senate, was majority Federalist. The lower house, the Assembly, was majority anti-Federalist. So the Senate, which was 10-8 in favor of the Constitution, wanted each house of the legislature to choose 4 of New York's 8 electors. The Senate would choose 4 and the Assembly would choose 4. And that way, 4 of New York state electors would be pro-Constitution. The anti-federalists wanted the legislature to decide on the electors as a whole. So each member of the legislature would get 1 vote. They would have 1 slate of 8. Essentially, they would choose them in a joint session of the 2 houses. What that would mean practically is that all 8 of New York's electors would be anti-Constitution. So the Assembly would pass a bill saying this is how we're going to choose our electors. It would go to the Senate. The Senate would say, no, we're not going to do it that way. They would pass their own bill that would go back to the Assembly, and the Assembly would turn it down. It went to conference committee. They argued over it, couldn't come to a resolution. This went on for weeks. Then January 7th came, and they were deadlocked. So,
and what's crazy? He's not even mentioning the fact that when all this started, all right, all parties were Republican. All right, there was no Democrats. We did a live, right, and we broke it down on how and when they divided, when they became red and blue. All right, donkey and elephant. Like, that's the crazy part. Like, I feel as though all this beef, all this fuel is what made them divide into 2 parties, Republicans and Democrats. Democrats, my bad.
So, midnight, January 7th, they still hadn't chosen their electors. That was it. So they did not have electors. The same gridlock meant that New York had no senators because it was up to the state legislature to choose senators. So it took them until, I think, the summer of 1789 to finally decide who their senators were going to be. A similar thing actually happened in New Hampshire because New Hampshire's legislature was also divided in a similar way. But in that case, the anti-federalists in the lower house of the New Hampshire legislature gave in and agreed to the Senate's terms. So New Hampshire did, and it was very close to midnight when they made that compromise. So New Hampshire did end up participating in the election.
Hi,
We're
Charity Water.
Oh man,
If we lost you at Charity, we get
the
it.
channel. Shit.
Now, this business of whether an elector was pro-Constitution or anti-Constitution, what was that about? The Constitution ended up getting approved in these 11 states, but there were a lot of people who were uncomfortable with it. And so what they hoped they could do was get a second convention. That's what they wanted to have. They wanted to get a second constitutional convention that would draft a different constitution that would be more acceptable to the anti-federalists. Barring that, they could, at the very least, get elected to positions within the federal government and then undermine the federal system from within, and thereby prevent the full weight of the federal government from coming into force, perhaps to make people disillusioned with the federal system and provoke them to agree to the new constitutional convention. Another thing was, if you get anti-federalists elected to Congress, at the very least, they could be clamoring to get amendments. Now, when the Constitution was approved in the various states, the pro-Constitution people promised, which seems a little bit shady in retrospect, honestly, but they said, oh, go ahead and approve the Constitution now. We promise we'll adopt amendments later. So people were voting for the Constitution with the promise in the future. It wasn't really binding, but with this understanding that in the future amendments will be adopted, which ended up happening. That was the Bill of Rights, which,
man, we in the future and people still don't know their amendments. They don't know the Constitution. They don't know the laws. They don't know their rights.
Came into effect in 1791. But that was the idea of electing anti-Constitution electors. They were hoping that if you get enough anti-federalists as electors, then they could cause problems for the presidential election. Everybody knew that Washington was going to become president. They knew that actually back in 1787 when they were drafting the Constitution. George Washington was one of the Virginia's delegates, and he was actually sitting there in the room while they're all talking about the president. And it was kind of an open secret that they're creating this office, and George Washington's going to be the guy they're going to put in that office first. So the Federalists were afraid that anti-Federalist electors might mess up the election. And how would they do that? The framers of the Constitution created this system where the electors would vote for two people for president rather than one person.
Yep.
And then the person who got the most votes would become president, and the person who got the second most votes would be vice president.
All right. I like that he's breaking it down. All right. So he is mentioning that they did see, they started off as Republicans. I keep trying to tell everybody. All right. Then somewhere along the line, like it says right here, all right, they got split up. And I knew it. See, I'm not the only one that thinks of it. Listen, I pay attention. I love watching history videos. All right. I love reading history. I don't just watch videos. Right. I've showed it before here on this channel. I've got books on top of freaking books of nothing but history. All right. I got collections of encyclopedias. I got dictionaries. I love reading. And my preference, my go-to in reading is history. Why? I don't know. All right. It's like my preference in movies is horror. Don't ask me why. But anyways, all right. I love diving down rabbit holes. All right. I've been connected these dots. Like, it's crazy how, all right, they teach us certain stuff in school, but they leave out the most important. All right. And when they leave out the most important, they add what they want to add, or they twist that shit up to the point where they mess somebody's mind up on some real shit. You grow up thinking this, then when you find out it's this, you'll be like, what the? On some real, you know what, man? Listen, if you understand where I'm coming from, and then you get it. I shouldn't have to keep breaking it down, man, because y'all get it.
People for president rather than one person might mess up the election. And how would they do that? The framers of the Constitution created this system where the electors would vote for two people for president rather than one person. And then the person who got the most votes would become president, and the person who got the second most votes would be vice president. And the weakness of this system became apparent immediately, because the way it's supposed to work is George Washington will get the most votes, and then John Adams will get the second most votes. Then you get president, vice president. Great. But what if George Washington does not get the most votes? What if he gets the second most votes? What if some anti-federalist electors decide not to vote for George Washington? Maybe they vote for Adams and then some other candidate, just some throwaway name. They could potentially throw the election to Adams, making John Adams the first president and George Washington the vice president. Now, the problem with that is Adams was not as popular as Washington, especially in the South. And so that could reduce the goodwill that the general public had for the federal government, right? And so that would help to undermine the federal government and therefore achieve the ends that the anti-Constitution people had.
Good point.
That was something that the Federalists were afraid could happen.
Maybe.
Or alternatively, another possibility would be if there were enough anti-Federalist electors they could get George Washington elected president and then an anti-federalist elected vice president. Now, among the anti-federalists, there were a few names, but I think the most common name that was bandied about at the time was George Clinton. If you were an anti-federalist elector, it was expected that you would end up voting for Clinton, maybe Washington Clinton, or maybe Adams Clinton. You could do that. So just to give you an example of a possible thing that could play out, the Federalist electors could vote for Washington and Adams, and then the anti-Federalist electors could vote for Adams and Clinton. And so then Adams ends up getting the most votes. Washington comes in second, Clinton comes in third. That makes Adams the president, Washington the vice president.
But that didn't work.
Just as one example of many possible permutations of this. So the point is, the system that was written into the Constitution was a bad system.
I mean, listen, obviously we know that. We know that, obviously. All right, I was going to say something, but let me answer.
Having the electors vote for two names and not designate which one they wanted to be president, which one they wanted to be vice president was a flaw. And people at the time recognized that as a flaw. So remember, there are two stages of electing the president. First, you get the electors, and then the electors choose the president. So the electors were going to meet and choose the president on February 4th. In the run-up to that electoral college vote, some political figures in the country were trying to organize a system where they would make sure that Adams didn't get as many votes as Washington. And the most prominent figure in this movement was Alexander Hamilton. He was writing a ton of letters to different people. He was not the only one involved with this. There were a few others also who were writing letters to different states, writing to the different electors saying, make sure you don't vote Washington Adams. Make sure there are some guys, there who are going to vote for somebody besides Adams. So if you look at the results of the 1789 election, you look at the Electoral College votes, it looks like, everybody voted.
All right, my bad. Let me go back a little bit on that. Not too much, but I think it did. But listen. So let's break down this myth, all right? Not break it down. Let's point out the myth, all right? People act like, the founding fathers, all right, were pure, noble, untouched by politics. And nah, man, nah. I'm not going to sit here and lie, all right? They were scheming from day one, all right? They were already, gaming the system, already deciding who gets to shine and who gets to, sideline. Have y'all not peeped how every president is related to, somebody famous or somebody that's already been in office? Or related to somebody in the history books? Washington was the symbol, all right, the safe bet, the unity figure. Adams was the backup, but Hamilton made sure he stayed in his lane. All right, and here's the bigger truth, all right, the Electoral College wasn't just a formality back then. It was the battlefield. It was where, power got negotiated, where schemes got played, where gatekeepers decided who, would lead. Sound familiar? I don't got my little cricket sound, man. Shit, I'm gonna have to put it because that's all I hear right now is crickets. All right, it sounds familiar because that's the same energy we see today. Different names, different faces, same damn game. So when people say politics used to be pure, I laugh. The first election was about survival, yes, but it was also about control, about making sure the Constitution stood. But how can I say it? But also about making sure that certain men stood taller than others. And Hamilton's little scheme proves it, right? Even in 1789, the system wasn't neutral, all right? It was rigged by the gatekeepers. So has history changed? Or has it been dressed up?
Who were going to vote for somebody besides Adams. So if you look at the results of the 1789 election, you look at the Electoral College votes, it looks like, everybody voted for Washington, and then a bunch of people voted for Adams, and then there were a bunch of small vote totals for other people. A lot of those votes were deliberate throwaway votes where they would have voted for Adams, but deliberately chose not to vote for Adams because they were trying to mitigate against a potential anti-federalist scheme. In Connecticut, they had 7 electors. 5 of them voted for Washington and Adams. 2 of them voted for Washington and Huntington. The votes for Huntington were going to go to Adams. They voted for Huntington as part of the scheme that Hamilton was organizing. In Pennsylvania, again, those 2 that voted for Hancock would have voted for Adams. In Maryland, there were 8 electoral votes. 2 of the electors could not actually make it to the election. The Electoral College meets on a state-by-state basis. So the electors in each state come together. In Maryland, the 8 electors were supposed to meet in Annapolis to do their voting. 2 of the electors couldn't make it. One of them was sick. He had gout and therefore couldn't travel. The other one was unable to because of ice that blocked. I think he had to cross either the Chesapeake Bay or a river, and it was filled with ice, and so he wasn't able to make it to Annapolis. Only 6 electors in Maryland participated. All 6 of them voted Washington and Harrison. Harrison was Chief Justice of the Maryland General Court. He was not a national figure. They voted for him purely as part of Hamilton's scheme to make sure that Washington came in first and Adams came in second. They would have voted for Adams otherwise. Now, not all of these votes were like that. In some of the states, the electors really were voting for someone besides Adams because they didn't want Adams. They wanted somebody else instead. I think the votes for John Jay were like that. I think the votes for John Jay were legitimately for John Jay. I mean, I did a lot of reading about this, but I couldn't figure out exactly for every single state what the motivations were of the electors.
Man, listen, see, Hamilton thought he was slick back in 1789. He schemed behind the scenes, whispering in electors' ears, making sure John Adams didn't rise, too high. He wanted Washington to shine clean, untouchable, unanonymous. And Adams, he got clipped down to size. That was the first taste of manipulation, all right, in America, elections. Day one, the game was already rigged. I don't know why I say rigged. What the fuck am I saying? I need to get it together, all right? A lot hasn't really changed, y'all. Listen. Fast forward to now. Tell me what's really changed. The schemes didn't disappear. They just got dressed up. Instead of handwritten ballots and, secret whispers, we got billion-dollar campaigns, corporate donors, media machines, and algorithms, all right? Algorithms, all right? Deciding what you see, what you believe, and how you vote. Back then, Hamilton pulled the strings, right, in a room. Today, lobbyists pull the strings in boardrooms. Billionaires pull the strings with checks. And tech companies pull strings with data. Different tools, same hustle. All right?
But if I were to guess, and this is based on incomplete research of the election, I think the election would have looked more like this if there hadn't been so much strategic voting. Now, this setup of the way the electors would vote for president, voting for 2 names and not distinguishing which one you wanted to be president, which one vice president, this continued to be a problem in every presidential election after this until they fixed it. And they finally fixed it in the 12th Amendment, where they said that electors will say which one they're voting for president and which one they're voting for vice president. The election results really hurt John Adams. I mean, he didn't have any expectation of being elected president. He, like everyone else, expected Washington to get the most electoral votes, but he didn't expect to get as few electoral votes as he got. And he felt kind of devastated by that. It's kind of sad because it didn't have to happen that way. They didn't have to worry that the anti-federalists would pull off a scheme, because they didn't. All the fears about anti-federalist shenanigans came to nothing. Washington easily got all 69 electoral votes, and Adams wasn't going to get more than him. There were enough people voting for Hancock and John Jay and Rutledge to prevent Adams from tying with Washington. So it's kind of sad how that worked out. But anyway, those are the election results. George Washington was elected president. John Adams was elected vice president. They both traveled to New York, which was the first seat of the federal government, and were sworn in the spring of 1780 to begin their first terms, respectively. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this election. If you're an American, do you think it'd be better or worse to have our elections the way they were back in 1789? If you're not an American, how much better do you think your system is compared to the original American system of 1789? I do plan on doing a follow-up video on the next presidential election, 1792, when George Washington was reelected. So stick around for that. Thanks for watching.
All right, here we go. My bad. I apologize for that screen, guys. All right, let's get back into this, John, so that we can end this live lesson. Let's talk about the myth. All right, manipulation didn't start with social media. All right, it didn't start with super PACs. It started, the moment this country decided that power was too fragile to leave to chance. The founding fathers schemed, the politicians schemed, and the system learned to scheme better with every generation. All right, so don't get fooled by spectacles. Don't get hypnotized by the ads, the debates, the slogans. Remember, the game has always been rigged. The question isn't whether manipulation exists. The question is whether we see it, call it out, and refuse to let it define us. Because if Hamilton had been history with a whisper, imagine what billion-dollar machines are bending today. All right, like back in 1789, the election of George Washington wasn't about parties, campaigns, or slogans. It was about whether the Constitution itself would survive. No political parties, no primaries, no rallies, just 69 electors casting votes, all right, in January. Not November, with New York disqualified and North Carolina and Rhode Island sitting out because they hadn't, ratified the Constitution yet. Washington's anonymous win wasn't a show. It was a lifeline. The system was fragile, and the question was simple. Do we keep this Constitution or scrap it? Now, fast forward to today. Survival isn't the question anymore. Spectacle is. Elections have become theater, broadcast like reality TV, all right, with billions spent on ads, conversations, debates, and media coverage designed to entertain as much to inform. The Electoral College, once treated, as the battlefield of legitimacy, is now seen by many as formality, right? Overshadowed by the drama of election night coverage, right? Horse race polls and viral sound bites. And here's the truth: the gatekeepers never disappeared, right? In Washington's time, they were the electors and the schemers like Hamilton, whispering in rooms to clip John Adams down. Today, they're billionaires, lobbyists, media, all right? How can I say conglomerates? All right, listen, look, tech companies, all right, pulling strings with money, all right, airtime and algorithms, different uniforms, same control. They decide who gets the spotlight, who gets silenced, and who gets clipped down to size. So let's be real, all right? Politics didn't evolve into purity. It evolved into performance. What was once about holding the country together is now about holding attention. What was once about survival is now, about spectacle. And the gatekeepers, they still guarding the gates, all right, making sure power stays. They make sure that power stays in the hands of of the few. That, that's the Constitution, Washington. That's the Constitution, all right. The connection that Washington's election was about. It was weird, fragile, and manipulated. Today, elections are loud, dazzling, and manipulated. The tools changed, but the hustle stayed the same. On some real shit. Hold on one second, guys. All right, y'all. Listen. We've traveled through history tonight, all right, through the rise and fall of cocaine from sacred leaf to cartel empire, through the $1 trillion war on drugs that failed, all right, through smuggling routes, all right, routes, however y'all want to say, lit by strobes in the Gulf, all right, through the purity corrupted by greed. We saw how gatekeepers profited off pain, how fear was weaponized, how cages were, built not for drugs, but for people. All right, and we called out the hypocrisy. Times haven't changed. Only uniforms have. All right. Then we dove down, we dove into the politics. Back to, 1789, where George Washington's election was about survival, not spectacle. No parties, no campaigns, no primaries, just electors deciding whether the Constitution itself would stand. And you know what's crazy? Washington won anonymously. All right. But even then, schemes were in play. Hamilton clipped Adams down, proving that manipulation, all right, was baked into the system for since day one, from day one. All right. Fast forward to now, and elections have become theater. Billions spent on ads and endless debates, viral sound bites, media machines, selling democracy like reality TV. Survival isn't the question anymore. Spectacle is. All right. And the gatekeepers, they're still here. Back then they whispered in rooms. Today they pull strings with money media and algorithms, different costumes, same freaking control. All right. And here's the truth. History shows us. History shows us that, the game has always been rigged, whether it was cocaine, all right, demonetized, or politics or elections manipulated for power. The pattern is the same. Gatekeepers guarding the gates, deciding who rises and who, gets clipped down. All right. But here's the reality. All right. We are not props in their show. We are not pawns in their hustle. We are better than the lies they told us, stronger than the cages they built for us, louder than the silence they tried to bury us in. Survival may not be the question anymore, but freedom still is. And if they still, if they don't like, hearing that or what we say, like, let them choke on the motherfucking truth. Because, the legacy belongs to us. The fire belongs to us. The story belongs to us. And tonight, we remind the world we're not what they say we were. All right? We are more. All right? So with that being said, guys, till next time, it's your shorty Rachel. I hope all of y'all have a blessed and humble day. Continue to have a blessed and humble afternoon.
Yeah, we all got dreams, but we stuck in the grind. Looking back at the past, but it's time to unwind. Everyone can do it, just gotta take that step. Stop dwelling on the losses, let's rewrite the rep. Hating on the president, calling him corrupt. But let me break it down, we gotta interrupt. Law's been in place, he's just playing the game. Ain't about the man, it's about the system's name. How do we move forward? Let's add something new. Together we can rise, yeah, that's what we do. Don't get stuck in the past, let the hate fall away. We build in the future, let's seize the day. Can't you see? You bleeding all over the matrix, caught in the hype. Man, it's all fake tricks. The medic bag empty, y'all shit out of luck. Wake up before you get stuck. Y'all act like y'all in love, but y'all really in love. Lost in the fame and the fortune. You ain't got no sense. You got the influencer fixation. You let them run your life. Red or blue, you're just a puppet with strings, always in strife. You think they care, but they don't. Things of the past, let's rearrange. Y'all really stuck. Puppets, with. So how do we move forward? Let's add something new. Together we can rise. Yeah, that's what we do. Don't get stuck in the past. Let the hate fall away. We're building the future.